Chapter 1474. Outside the palace, Yang Jian, bathed in blood, scanned his surroundings. If he hadn't entered, he wouldn't have known that the Shao family's defenses were like a fortress. As he followed Uncle An, he could already sense the auras of dozens of sovereigns. After all, he hadn't even touched the inner halls yet. Thud thud thud. Yang Jian sensed her light footsteps through the vibrations on the ground. In his shock, he retracted his gaze. He gripped the Erlang lance, which was still stained with blood, and stared coldly ahead. "Emissary Yang, the Emperor requests your presence." The stooped Uncle An smiled and gestured for him to enter. Yang Jian's eyes narrowed, his expression somber as he strode into the palace. As soon as he entered, he felt a wave of pressure bearing down on him. Yang Jian didn't hesitate. His divine power surged outwards, and his aura surged. He slammed his lance into the ground with a thud. The oppressive pressure was instantly nullified. Yang Jian narrowed his eyes and snorted. "It seems Emperor Shao wants to take me down a notch?" He gazed indifferently at the palace. When Shao Ting heard this, he laughed heartily and leaped off his throne. "Emissary Yang, you've misunderstood." He wanted to pat Yang Jian on the shoulder and tell him not to overthink things. However, before his hand could land on Yang Jian's shoulder, a wave of divine power blasted it away. "Don't try to curry favor with me. This was all part of your plan, wasn't it? You intentionally sent someone to contact me, then had your people expose my whereabouts so that I would fall out with the Upheaval Alliance. Now you're trying to recruit me. Thunder-punishing Emperor, your methods are truly seasoned." From start to finish, Yang Jian hadn't given Shao Ting any face. His entire being radiated intense hostility. "I advise you to give up on that idea. I won't blame you for recklessly helping me out. But if you want me to serve you, don't even think about it." Little did he know, the more he acted this way, the more satisfied Shao Ting was. He didn't care about Yang Jian's resistance at all. His eyes flashed with a warm smile. "Emissary Yang, you're exaggerating. How could I, Shao Ting, do such a thing? Although I thirst for talent, I wouldn't resort to such despicable method." "Ha!" Yang Jian laughed. "Actually, I didn't invite you here because I wanted to recruit you," said Shao Ting. "Then you specially sent someone to help me escape, and even had someone invite me to your residence. Could it be that you want to have a cup of tea with me?" Yang Jian said. "That's what I was thinking." With a wave of his hand, a square table appeared in the center of the hall. "This Emperor knows that Special Envoy Yang is not someone who will submit to others, and I have never thought of asking you to work for me. Rather than recruiting you as my subordinate, I'd rather befriend you, Special Envoy Yang." Shao Ting smiled gracefully, then pointed at the table. Let's sit and talk." It was also at this moment that Yang Jian looked towards the square table. Only then did he discover that there were actually 3 prayer mats and 3 cups of tea around the square table. "Someone else?" "Yes, there's also a hero that I've recruited recently. Speaking of which, you might have met him before." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of footsteps rang out from the main entrance of the hall. Yang Jian narrowed his eyes and turned around. When he saw who it was, his eyes widened, and his entire body tensed up. He clutched his lance tightly. "How could it be you?" Yang Jian's rebellion and Yi Zichen's heavy injuries caused the higher-ups of the Upheaval Alliance to fall silent. Meanwhile, within Yi Zichen's room, Shao who was still searching for Yang Jian with the Upheaval Alliance's ruler. However, the great sage, Pu Jingwan, and the others had already returned. The higher-ups of the Upheaval Alliance furrowed their brows. Ever since Yi Zichen was injured, he'd been unconscious. Although they'd called a doctor to check on him, and said he was fine, they still hadn't seen him show any signs of waking up. "Don't just stand around. Let Yi Zichen rest," said Xiaoyumei, who was sitting on the edge of the bed. When the Upheaval Alliance heard this, they all walked out of the room. Before long, only Pu Jingwan, the great sage, and the others remained. At the same time, Yi Zichen, who had been unconscious, suddenly opened his eyes and sat up on the bed. Yi Zi. The great sage walked up to him. Pu Jingwan looked around, then waved her hand and set up a seal around the room. Finally, they're all gone. Yi Zichen let out a sigh of relief and looked around at the empty room. In truth, Yi Zichen had been pretending to be unconscious. Although his injuries looked severe, they hadn't harmed his core. He'd only pretended to be unconscious because he didn't want to face the higher-ups who cared about him. At the end of the day, this was all just a show that only a few of them knew about. In the eyes of the higher-ups, Yang Jian was nothing more than a rebel. That bastard Yang Jian was too heavy-handed. Even if he wanted to be more decisive, he wouldn't have cut off your arm and injured you so badly, would he? The great sage's eyes blazed with fury as he slandered Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen laughed. I asked the Hermit Emperor to make that lotus arm a disposable tool. Even if Yang Jian hadn't cut it off, it would have been useless in a few days anyway. You think he went overboard, but I think he went a little too easy. The more he injured me, the less Shao Ting would be wary of him. It would have been great if he'd just beat me half to death. Then even if this was all a show, I'll chase him to the ends of the earth, said the great sage, glaring at him. Yi Zichen chuckled, then looked out the window. Although the high walls blocked his line of sight, the window faced the main gate of the Shao family estate. He could even vaguely make out the Shao family's lights behind the walls. If I calculate the time, Yang Jian should have met up with Shao Ting by now, right? More or less. When Pu Jingwan heard this, she nodded. When we chased after him, we were able to clearly pinpoint Yang Jian's location. If someone suddenly appeared midway, it was most likely someone from the Shao family. Yi Zichen smiled and nodded, then instinctively pulled out a cigarette. Xiao Yumei snatched the cigarette and glared at him. She even extended her hand. Yi Zichen naturally knew what she meant. He smiled awkwardly, placed the cigarette in her hand, and rubbed his lip. I hope everything goes well for him. Ding dong. At that moment, everyone's phones rang at the same time. They glanced at each other. For all of them to receive a message at the same time, it had to be Yang Jian who'd sent it. The few of them opened the group chat. The latest message was sent by Yang Jian. However, when they saw it, "Who's Bai Haoyu?" Yi Zichen looked at the others and saw that their gazes were solemn. The great sage gnashed his teeth and said, Bai Haoyu is Bai Yulong's father. Bai Haoyu is Bai Yulong's father, he said. He's the one who injured you. What? Chapter 1475. Yang Jian had only sent one message in the group, but it had been read over and over again by several people in the group. Bai Haoyu. That's right, he'd sent it to Bai Haoyu. Erlingshin, Mommy, I feel like my identity as a spy is about to be exposed. That stupid dog Bai Haoyu's working for Shao Ting now. This was Yang Jian's original message. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Man proposes, God disposes. They'd thought their undercover plan was foolproof, but to think a variable like Bai Haoyu had appeared. No wonder I sensed an aura escape when the Bai family patriarch self-destructed. I thought I was mistaken. I never would have guessed it was him. After learning Bai Haoyu's identity, Yi Zichen thought back to when he'd woken up in the Bai family and taken Lin Ru and the others into the tower. He'd vaguely sensed an aura escape during the explosion. At the time, he'd thought he'd been mistaken. The Bai family patriarch was infinitely close to an emperor. Even great emperors like Shui Yang would be gravely injured if they were at the center of the explosion. Yi Zichen didn't think anyone could survive it. Bai Haoyu. Biting the corner of their lips, the others' faces were extremely solemn. Shao Ting didn't know them very well, so it was likely he didn't understand their relationship. However, the great sage Yang Jian had fought with Bai Haoyu before. As long as Bai Haoyu wasn't an idiot, he would be able to sense the friendship between the two of them. Let's kill our way to the Shao family and save Yang Jian, said the great sage with a frown. Don't. Yi Zichen rejected the great sage's suggestion. If Yang Jian can send a message, and I don't sense any distress signal. That means he hasn't been exposed yet. Yi Zichen licked his lips, typed out a message, and sent it. Only idealism. How are you doing? Did they suspect anything? If you've really been exposed, don't resist. We'll come and save you right now. Monkey King. Erlingshin. No need, I'm safe. Yang Jian sat in the room Xiao Ting had arranged for him. He carefully placed several seals around the room, then stood by the window, occasionally glancing out as he sent messages. Erlingshin. After drinking a few cups of tea with Xiao Ting, I told him I was tired, and he found me a place to stay. Now that I was alone here, I didn't feel that the other party had any intention of sealing me. Monkey King. Didn't you say by how you was there? Erlingshin. Isn't he here? Even now, Yang Jian felt a lingering fear. He never would have guessed that Xiao Ting would recruit Bai Haoyu. When she first saw him, her heart was in her throat. He'd had a feeling that things were about to go south, but Bai Haoyu had only nodded at him. Invincible, adorable beauty. He didn't recognize you? Ultimate charmer. You can't recognize it? That's impossible. Erlingshin, from the looks of it, he should have recognized me. While we were drinking tea, he glanced at me several times and even smiled faintly. Erlingshin, from his smile, it doesn't seem like he didn't recognize me. Monkey King, then hurry up and leave. It's too dangerous to stay in there. Bai Haoyu was like a ticking time bomb. No one knew when he'd explode. So long as he was in the Xiao family, Yang Jian's undercover work would be fraught with danger. Erlingshin, no. In the face of the great sage's concern, Yang Jian decisively refused. Monkey King, are you looking to die? Erlingshin, what do you mean looking to die? Even though Bai Haoyu recognized me, he didn't expose me on the spot. That means he won't expose me. Erlingshin, or rather, he'll use this as leverage to threaten me. Erlingshin, I want to see what he's planning. When the time comes, I'll decide if I should leave or not. Invincible, adorable beauty. Oh, I didn't think you'd be so smart. Monkey King, I think Yang Jian's right. Monkey King, I think you're all crazy. Erlingshin, Monkey King, you actually know how to care for your daddy. I'm so happy. Monkey King, my son, I'm just worried about my son. I'm afraid that if you die in the Xiao family, I won't be able to collect your corpse. Erlingshin, Tui, can't you say something nice? Only idealism. Stop messing around. When Yi Zichen saw the two clowns bickering again, he hurriedly spoke up to stop them. Although Yang Jian said the Xiao family wasn't monitoring him, so long as he was there, he was in danger. This was especially true when he was transmitting information. He couldn't afford to be careless. No one knew if Xiao Ting wasn't monitoring Yang Jian on the surface, or if he was doing so in secret. Only idealism. Since you've decided to stay in the Xiao family, I'll support your decision. However, if there's any danger, immediately retreat. We have many ways to deal with the Xiao family. I don't want to see you in danger. Erlingshin, understood. If there's even the slightest sign of trouble, I'll run right away. Erlingshin, let me tell you, although I've only been in the Xiao family for less than 4 hours, I've learned quite a bit. Only idealism. What? Erlingshin. First, the Xiao family's experts are definitely several levels higher than the upheaval alliances. I haven't even entered the inner hall, but I can already sense the auras of at least 40 rulers. I'm sure there'll be even more in the inner hall. Erlingshin. Second, I sensed an aura similar to that of a monkey. Monkey King, me? A Yao? Erlingshin. It's very possible, but it was only for a moment. I didn't feel it very clearly. However, I can confirm that the information about the Xiao family's betrayal of the god race is 90% true. Ultimate charmer. Of course it's true. Xiao who saw it with his own eyes. Xiao who saw it with his own eyes? Yi Zichen suddenly arched his brows. Why didn't you tell me? I never had a chance to tell you, said Xiao Yumei. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. Ever since he'd heard about Xiao Ting, he'd been busy dealing with all sorts of matters. He really hadn't had much time to talk about it. At the same time, Yang Jian sent another message in the group. Erling Shin, it's not convenient for me to talk to you right now. Let's talk later. Only idealism. Alright, be careful. Monkey King, live well. Yang Jian closed the group chat. He put his phone back in his pocket, then narrowed his eyes at the door. Since you're already here, there's no need to hide. Before he'd even finished speaking, a pitch-black figure emerged from the corner of the room. When the light from outside shone on him, Yang Jian's brows furrowed solemnly. The newcomer smiled and waved at him. How did you get in? In truth, I'm not just skilled in the Tao of the sword. I also know a bit about the Tao of space. Although I'm not particularly proficient, passing through walls isn't a big deal. You, on the other hand, were able to sense me so keenly. I'm quite shocked. Don't be so polite with me. Tell me, why are you here? I don't think we're close enough to chat at night. Don't you agree? Chapter 1476. After saying goodbye to Yang Jian in the group, everyone put their phones away. Although they'd only just joined the Xiao family, Yang Jian's information had already confirmed that the Xiao family was in cahoots with outsiders. However, he'd learned all of this beforehand. He'd sent Yang Jian to spy on them so he could catch them off guard. At the very least, they wouldn't be caught off guard by a colossus like the Lightning Emperor clan. What concerned Yi Zichen the most were the rulers of the Xiao family. There were at least 40 rulers in the outer sect. What kind of power was that? A few days ago, he'd lived in the northern Divine Mountain's Sea of Innocence, but he hadn't seen that many rulers. Although the Sea of Innocence had hidden experts, the Lightning Emperor clan had existed since the beginning of the era. How could they not? Do you want me to call Xiao Hu over and tell you in detail what he saw? Xiao Yumei asked Yi Zichen after exiting the group. Don't. Yi Zichen shook his head. Tomorrow I have to take care of a rather important matter. Knowing too much will only distract me. Are you going out? Asked Xiao Yumei. Xiao Yumei's eyes were filled with worry. For a moment Yi Zichen didn't dare look her in the eye. He looked away, gazed at the starry sky, and nodded. You just returned from the Sea of Innocence, and your injuries are still so severe. Are you in such a hurry? I'm in a hurry. Yi Zichen's tone was unquestionable. I have to leave tomorrow. These injuries are nothing. Once I open my celestial eye, the starlight will heal me. I'll be fully healed on the way. All right, I'll go with you. You stay, and Pu Jingwan stays as well. Yi Zichen looked at the great sage. Just let the great sage come with me. The Upheaval Alliance needs people here, and we don't know when Yang Jian's whereabouts will be exposed. If you two stay here, it'll be easier to deal with any accident. Xiao Yumei bit her lip and wanted to say something, but in the end she swallowed her words. There really was too much she wanted to say, but she knew that what Yi Zichen wanted to do was 100 times, 1,000 times more important. No matter what she said, she couldn't say it now. What she had to do? She had to support him. All right, I understand. Xiao Yumei nodded. Oh right. Start contacting the Sea of Innocence, the Four Directions Palace, and the Jade Lake. Tell them to start sending talents to the Upheaval Alliance. We also need a few diviners. Even though we have the Yao servants of the Yao Sealing Pagoda, they are still a Yao force and should not be exposed to the public. I need these divine mountains will provide me with manpower to form a branch of the Upheaval Alliance. I trust that, out of respect for the Master of the Stars, they won't refuse. Xiao Yumei nodded again. At that moment Yi Zichen's phone rang. Everyone in the room thought that Yang Jian had sent a message in the group, but to their surprise, there was no notification from their phones. Yi Zichen squinted his eyes and took out his phone, then opened the social media app to look at the messages. Not long after, the corner of his mouth curved into a smile. After a brief reply, he put his phone away and looked at Xiao Yumei. Help me find someone. Early morning. Northwest Divine Mountain. This was the highest of the 9 divine mountains. The entire mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist, making it seem like an immortal's paradise, like a dream or an illusion. The morning sun shone with golden light, obscured by the clouds. At that very moment, a group of a few dozen people stood near the northwest divine mountain's ascension pool. Normally, it was rare to see 3 to 5 people at an ascension pool. Even in the history of the God realm, there had never been a group of a few dozen. The receptionists were excited, but these ascenders were very strange. Similar to the other ascenders, they were all curious about the unfamiliar environment of the divine mountain. However, they were dressed in all sorts of styles, and they politely declined the receptionist's offer of a suitable village for them. All of them strolled around the ascension pool. Not only that, but they also saw 3 people who had obtained the Terminator crystal card among these people. Absolute. That meant they were peerless monsters. Anyone with an absolute crystal card was bound to be extraordinary in the future. The last time we encountered an absolute card was a few years ago, right? I haven't heard of any other ascension pools in the past few years, and we've even encountered all the absolute cards that came. That's right. Receiving so many absolute freaks has made me feel a little discouraged. Don't even think about it. All absolute freaks are monsters. Hey, what do you guys think about that absolute guy we received last time? He should have gone to Skyspan. We should have gone back too, but we were transferred to the Northwest Divine Mountain. Otherwise, we could have gone back and hugged his leg. Hugged his leg? Whether or not he remembers us is another matter entirely. The crowd sighed. Absolute freaks were the most dazzling existences in the Divine Mountains. They were merely lowly receptionists who'd only met them once. Just like now, the ascenders before them referred to them as seniors. In a few years, they'd be nothing in the eyes of these absolute freaks. Whoosh. Several whooshing sounds could be heard, and the clouds in the sky were blown away a little. The Northwest Divine Mountain attendants who'd stayed behind to receive the ascenders were stunned, and their eyes grew solemn. They could sense the speed at which the newcomers were moving. They were all diviners at the very least, and even their captain was only a Sky Supreme. There were quite a few of them, at least 20 or more. To people at their level, diviners were lofty existences. For more than 20 to suddenly arrive was something they rarely encountered. For a moment, the attendants couldn't help but hold their breaths. They straightened their clothes and lined up to await the arrival of the diviners. Before long, the diviners landed. As they passed through the clouds, they could vaguely make out a black-robed man walking at the very front. The other diviners were all behind him. They're definitely from some great clan. It looks like some great clan found out about these absolute freaks and sent a direct descendant to recruit them. I really can't be any more envious. A clan that can casually order around so many diviners must be an incredible existence even in the Northwest Divine Mountain. The attendants nodded in agreement. Anyone who could command dozens of diviners had to be either rich or powerful. Insignificant figures like them, who were only here to make a living, couldn't possibly compare to a great clan. As the newcomers drew closer, the attendants grew even more solemn. Huang Yang, Fan Li Lu Baihui. Chapter 1477. The Ascension receptionist stared blankly at the black-robed man in front of him. He could sense the celestial aura emanating from him, as well as the dozens of celestial auras behind him. The only female receptionist among the receptionists blinked a few times and glanced at the people next to her. "What's wrong with you guys? It's only been a few years since we last met. Don't tell me you don't recognize me?" The black-robed man smiled as he walked to the front of the leader of the reception team and extended his hand. The leader hurriedly extended his hand and bowed to greet him carefully. "Brother Yi, no. Senior Yi." The newcomer was none other than Yi Zichen. As for the receptionists in front of the Ascension Pool, they were none other than the ones Yi Zichen had met on the Northern Divine Mountain. Yi Zichen didn't know whether to laugh or cry when Huang Yang called him Senior Yi, while the others also looked at him in terror. The people of the god race all knew that the person who was bestowed with the word absolute would definitely have extraordinary achievements in the future. But who could have guessed that the young man who had ascended the divine mountains only a few years ago was already a Deva-level senior, and was even in command of so many Deva-level experts? Don't call me Senior Yi. It makes me look old. Just call me Brother Yi like when we first met. That way I'll feel more comfortable. Yi Zichen nodded towards them with a smile, then looked towards the female receptionist. Lu Baihui, the team beauty, looks even prettier than before. Lu Baihui blushed when she heard that. Fan Li raised his voice. Who was the one who said that the absolute freak wouldn't recognize us after a few years? Doesn't Brother Yi recognize us? He even remembers our names clearly. Fan Li, Huang Yang frowned. Huang Yang was a rather old-fashioned person. From his perspective, Yi Zichen's friendliness was due to him giving them face. But at the end of the day, there was a huge gap between their realms. The other party was giving face, but they shouldn't be too presumptuous on the surface. Pang Li rubbed his nose resentfully after being scolded by Huang Yang. He didn't say anything else. Yi Zichen looked around them for a while, then smiled. Why are you guys here? Weren't you supposed to be at the Northern Divine Mountain? Duty rotation. The ascension pawns of the 9 Divine Mountains always take turns receiving missions. On the other hand, Brother Yi, could it be that you're here too? I'm here to pick up some friends. At this moment, someone waved at him from the ascension pool. Yi Zichen smiled towards Huang Yang and company before walking towards the ascension pond. The majestic group of more than 20 celestials left with them, leaving Huang Yang and the others to watch their back. I can't believe he's already a Deva. Lu Baihui sighed. When she first met Yi Zichen, she'd already been on the verge of breaking through to the Sky Supreme level. Even now, she was still on the verge of becoming a Sky Supreme. She'd never taken that final step. The others were not much different. None of them made any substantial progress. Some people are destined to rise above others. Brother Yi is obviously such a person. As he looked at the diviners led by Yi Zichen, Huang Yang sighed. He didn't even dare to think about leading dozens of devas. The people in the Ascension Pool were all members of the Lower Divine Mountains Upheaval Alliance. In truth, there were a few who descended from other planes as well, but they didn't know anyone on the Divine Mountains. They were in a strange environment, and Upheaval's recruitment drive had pushed them to join the Upheaval Alliance. When they saw Yi Zichen's arrival, most of the Upheaval Alliance's members were curious. The Lower Divine Mountains Upheaval Alliance was rapidly expanding, so not every member had seen Yi Zichen. Only the higher-ups could get in touch with him. They didn't know who Yi Zichen was, but they could sense that this newcomer was strong. As they watched, Yi Zichen walked up to a woman in a long dress and smiled warmly. "You're here! You're here!" Their eyes met, and their gazes brimmed with tenderness and sweetness. However, at a time like this, there were always people with poor judgment who would ruin the atmosphere. "Candy!" A pair of fair hands reached out, and her tone was slightly mischievous. Yi Zichen didn't even need to think to know who it was. He pulled a few bottles of pills from his spatial ring and placed them in her hands. She immediately skipped over to the Ahog youth. "Yuzhan and Lil Lori followed you up too. He's the Minister of the Right, but he's only ascending the Divine Mountains so late." Yi Zichen turned to look at Yin Shang, whose eyes brimmed with annoyance. "Don't mind him." Last night, Yi Zichen had asked Xiao Yumei to find Yin Shang. He'd received a message from Zuemo. She'd informed them that they'd be ascending the next morning, and that Yi Zichen was the one who'd instructed them to do so. He couldn't let Xiao Ting notice Zuemo, nor could he let him discover their relationship. That's why he'd chosen the Northwest Divine Mountain, which was hard to contact, as well as friendly territory. They ascended. The woman in the long dress was none other than Zuemo. "You're one of our 4 lucky stars, and the Minister of the Right, but your cultivation is so low. How are you going to rely on him to expand your territory in the future? Said Yin Shang meticulously. Alright, don't take it so seriously, alright? Said Yi Zichen helplessly. He didn't want to argue with Yin Shang any further. After learning he was the minister of the left, Yin Shang seemed to have transformed into a different person. No matter what he did, he took it very seriously. Yi Zichen sighed, then glanced at Zuemo. I have other matters to attend to, so I can't welcome you back. From now on, you'll follow Yin Shang, and you'll no longer be members of the Upheaval Alliance. Rather, you'll be working for the 100 Treasures Trade Association. Your Excellency, fated star, said Yin Shang. Zuemo nodded, then frowned at Yi Zichen. Why is that? Yin Shang will explain the specifics to you later. In short, just remember that you don't know anyone from the Upheaval Alliance. All right. Zuemo nodded. In the future, I'll secretly arrange for the resources and manpower the 100 Treasures Trade Association needs. From now on, we'll start promoting our phones and all of our products. I hope that when I return, I'll be able to see the social profiles of the leaders of the God race. We'll have them all in our hands, said Yi Zichen. No problem. In response to Zuemo's solemnity, Yi Zichen sighed, hugged her tightly, and kissed her on the forehead. I'm sorry. You've only just ascended the divine mountains, yet I'm already giving you such a heavy responsibility. With that, Yi Zichen looked away. Yin Shang. Yes, sir, said Yin Shang. Take Zuemo and the others to Thousand Flowers City. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes, then smiled at the great sage. Great sage, it's about time we set off. Are you ready? Chapter 1478. The Yao race was led by the Eastern monarch Tai, and below him were the 4 monarchs. The 4 monarchs ruled over the Yao race's 4 kingdoms. For tens of thousands of years, they had never interfered with each other, supporting the Yao race as a whole. The Northern Kingdom. This was a rather special kingdom of the Yao race. The Yao race in this kingdom were generally born humans. They couldn't transform into Yao bodies, but they had pure Yao aura and bloodline in their bodies. It was said that in the early years, the people of the Northern Kingdom liked to marry humans. As time passed, the people of this kingdom became more and more like humans. Now it was almost completely a human colony. Even now, there were still many humans in the God race who would marry the people of the Northern Kingdom. Cerulean Wave City was a city under the Northern Kingdom. Its strength couldn't be considered at the peak of the Northern Kingdom, only in the middle. There were tens of millions of Yao race and Yao race in the city. And yet, there was such a family in this city. In a courtyard covered with purple fragrant grass, a beautiful woman wearing a purple and white striped dress was half kneeling in the middle of the purple fragrant grass. Her purple and white striped dress blended well with the purple fragrant grass, and from a distance, it didn't look out of place. Her expression was calm, and her eyes were emotionless as she gently touched the purple fragrant grass. How many times have you been caught running away? A youth in blue and white armor leaned against a wooden pillar outside the grass garden. His white hair had a strand of black hair that reached the corner of his left eye. He silently looked at the woman in the grass garden and whispered, but didn't get a response. Are you throwing a tantrum at your big brother? No. No. Only now did the woman turn back and look at the youth indifferently. She shrugged and said, I'm just thinking about how to be more discreet next time. Although I've been caught these past few times, I've been able to run longer each time. Next time, I'll definitely be able to make it impossible for you to find me. It's my turn. The youth sighed and said, Don't think about it. Why? The woman tilted her head in confusion. 3 days from now is the day of your marriage with the son of Violet Yen City's city lord. You ought to be clearly aware of what this marriage means to our clan. The young man said in a low voice, Now that you've been captured, the clan elders will definitely keep a close eye on you. It'll be very difficult for you to leave the clan before you get married. Big brother, can't you help me? The woman asked again. It was clearly this young man who had captured her, but now she actually wanted this young man to help her. Hearing these words, 3 black lines flashed across the young man's face, and he said with a steely expression, "You're right. What do you think? Ever since I was young, you've always doted on me the most. Since you know that this is a marriage alliance, I don't want to be with that so-called city lord's son. I already have someone in mind. Can't you help me?" The woman stared at the young man with her bright eyes. The young man's tone became sluggish as he looked at the hope in his most beloved sister's eyes. "I can't, even though I know you're sacrificed by the marriage. But for the sake of the entire clan, no matter how much I dote on you, I must support the clan elder's decision." "Then forget it. It's better to rely on myself than others. I'll think of a way to slip away myself." There was not the slightest hint of disappointment in the woman's eyes. She shrugged nonchalantly, then turned back to look at the perfectly round violet-fragrant grass with a light smile. "I already said that you can't run. I'll stay here for the next few days to keep an eye on you." "Do you think you can slip away from me?" said the young man. "As long as you put down the water slightly, I'll be able to run away," said the woman. "But you must know that that's impossible," said the young man. "Then I'll just run after we get married. The result will be the same." The woman once again shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. Silence. In this silence, there was only the sound of a cool breeze passing through the grass, accompanied by a delicate fragrance. "I somewhat regret bringing you to the lower realms to play back then." The young man's eyes flashed sharply. "If I hadn't brought you to the lower realms, you wouldn't have met that monkey. If you hadn't met him, you wouldn't have become like this." "Unfortunately, there's no if. I just met him." The woman's tone was frivolous, and a blissful smile shone on her face. This might be the arrangement of the heavens. I met him in the vast sea of people. I'm truly blessed." As she spoke, the woman rested her chin on her hands. Her eyes twinkled like little stars as she smiled in infatuation. This expression caused the young man's expression to turn increasingly ugly. All of this was his mistake from thousands of years ago. At that time, his younger sister had just broken through to the supremacy stage. As her elder brother, he knew how hard his younger sister had worked in order to break through, so he wanted to bring her to relax. Among the countless choices of the lower realms, he chose the most wrong one, and also caused his younger sister to meet the most wrong person. He had originally thought that by bringing her back to the clan, as time passed, their feelings would slowly fade away. Unexpectedly, after thousands of years of separation, it didn't cause their feelings to fade away. Instead, that person became more and more perfect and mythical in his younger sister's mind. Until a few days ago, that monkey from the lower realms actually came looking for them, and his younger sister even found out about this. From then on, things got out of hand. "Xia, stop fooling around." The young man couldn't help but shout out her name. "You were born in the upper realms. That wild monkey is just a mountain king in the lower realms. How can he be worthy of you? Now that the clan is in trouble, marrying the son of the city governor is the best choice for the clan. How can he compare with the son of the city governor? The clan is in trouble. Why am I the one to marry him?" Suddenly Xia's aura changed. She stared at the young man fiercely. "Don't slander Joker. He's not a wild monkey. One day, he'll come to marry me on a 7-colored, auspicious cloud. He told me this himself. He came to see me a few days ago. He's here to fulfill his promise. But I've already forced him to retreat. Thousands of years have passed, but he's still so weak and useless. Besides, you're going to marry the son of the city governor in 3 days. This wedding is a big event for the whole northern kingdom. What can that wild monkey do?" The young man said disdainfully. "I'll say it again. He's not a wild monkey. He's Joker." As soon as he finished speaking, the fierceness on Xia's face faded away. Her eyes were filled with a slight smile. "I believe in him. He'll show up on the day of the wedding. Heroes always fall from the sky like gods at the most critical moment. You want him to kidnap the bride? Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I'm not insane. I'm idealistic. Chapter 1479. 1,000 miles of ice, 10,000 miles of drifting snow. The northern kingdom was surrounded by an endless chain of frozen mountain ranges. However, upon entering the northern kingdom's hinterland, it was filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers. The ancient flagstone street was like a city of the Protoss. Demon peddlers were hawking their wares on the streets, and there were also merchants who had left the city to hunt for treasures. Yi Zichen wore the straw hat he'd just bought from a Yao peddler. Yao used aureus, and a hand-knitted straw hat only cost 1 aureus. The man selling the straw hats was an old man who'd married a Yao. In order to take care of his business, Yi Zichen had bought quite a few straw hats. He didn't look pitiful at all. Based on the old man's aura, he was at least a sky supreme. Although his cultivation wasn't high, given his age, he shouldn't have reached such a level. She was so pitiful. The straw hats were truly exquisite, so Yi Zichen wanted to buy a few as gift. The northern kingdom is quite special. Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile as he looked at the endless stream of people on the street. Despite the ambiguous relationship between the three races, this place was still filled with harmony and happiness. It could be seen from the eyes of these pedestrians that the happiness level of their country was very high. The wife of the king of the northern kingdom is rumored to be a human, and he has always had a good impression of humans. He has always been committed to the peaceful coexistence of humans and demons, so much so that the people of the northern kingdom are like this. The people here are very happy to become partners with human experts. This can be seen by looking at the passers-by. What the great sage said was true. Divine race experts could be seen everywhere on the street. Not only did this place not discriminate against outsiders, but it was also very friendly to those from the divine race. Many of the celestial race experts could also see the partners of the demon race. From the expressions of those couples, it was obvious that they were very happy. For them to be able to do this at this time, it was already a world apart from the other demon race countries. This is a good place. If there's a chance, I'd like to get to know the king of the northern kingdom. Yi Zichen nodded and chuckled, then arched his brows at the great sage. How does it feel to revisit an old place? The great sage by Yi Zichen's side was stunned, but he quickly regained his composure. Old son, don't know what you are talking about. Still pretending? Yang Jian told me that the last time you came back, you went to the northern kingdom. Zixia Fairy is here. I don't believe what Ol Yang said about you, laughed Yi Zichen. His words are like farts, the great sage cursed. As expected. Yi Zichen winked and smiled. Since Fairy Zixia still kept her chastity to you, why did you leave without a word? This time, do you want me to help you snatch sister-in-law to the Protoss? That's our territory. Even if sister-in-law's family is powerful, they can't do anything to me. The great sage said nothing. Yi Zichen leaned over and asked mysteriously, Do you need it? Say something. If I wanted to, old son, would have done it a long time ago. The Zixia clan isn't considered a big clan here. At the mention of Fairy Zixia, the great sage's expression darkened. Don't worry about our business. I know what I'm doing. All right. Yi Zichen nodded and smiled. If you need anything, just say the word. The great sage nodded and changed the subject. Right? Didn't you say you had important business to take care of in the northern kingdom? Why are you still in the mood to stroll around? Work and rest must strike a balance. Since I'm here, I might as well take a look. Yi Zichen looked up and saw a nearby restaurant. With the mindset of a tourist, he arched his brows. Let's go in and have a drink. The Yao servants in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda always say the Yao's wine is great, especially the rose wine of the northern kingdom. Let's go in and have a taste. Proper business. Come on, that's all. The great sage couldn't dissuade Yi Zichen. His emotions were complicated, so he followed him inside. As soon as they entered, a tall, muscular man with a towel draped over his shoulder walked up to greet them. "Come, have a seat," said the waiter as he pointed at a table by the window. The waiter pointed at a seat by the window. Yizichin nodded and walked over, while the great sage kept his head down. Before Yizichin could sit down, the waiter glared at the great sage. "What are you doing here? Isn't this the young master who just returned? He's here to take a friend to taste our rose wine, but don't say I'm being a busybody. This time, you can't take all the rose wine." The great sage's face turned green. Yizichin glanced at him with a smile, then turned to the waiter and said, "Just give us 2 jugs of rose wine. Just give us 2 jars of rose wine, and give us some of your signature dishes." "All right," the waiter yelled as he walked to the kitchen. The atmosphere was somewhat strange. What kind of restaurant is this? The tables haven't even been wiped clean. "Yizi, let's go," said the great sage. In truth, the tables were so clean they could be used as mirrors. Yizichin understood that the great sage was deliberately picking on them. "We have rose wine here. Let's not drink here. Every restaurant in the Northern Kingdom has rose wine. It's the same no matter where we go," said the great sage. "Sir, you're wrong to say that." At that moment, the waiter walked over with 2 jugs of rose wine in his hands. "It's true that every restaurant in the Northern Kingdom has rose wine, but only our restaurant sells it well. Do you know why? It's because our rose wine tastes better than everyone else's." "That's right. If you want to drink rose wine, you have to come to the House of Rose," chimed in the other customers. Yizichin's smile grew even wider. The great sage's eyes flashed with golden light, startling everyone in the restaurant. He took the 2 jugs of rose wine from the waiter's hands, then glared at him and urged him to hurry up and leave. Just now, the great sage had released the aura of an emperor-level ruler. The waiter was but a mere Earth Supreme. How could he possibly withstand it? He gulped, then fled in panic. "Is it good to scare people like that?" Yizichin reached over and grabbed a jug of rose wine, then tilted his head back and took a sip. "It's pretty good. Yizi, I think we should focus on proper business. You were in such a hurry when you got here, but now you're here sightseeing? That's not good." To be honest, Yizichin had known the great sage for so long, but this was the first time he'd seen him like this. His expression was frantic, and his emotions were tense. What's more, the waiter had said that the great sage had reserved all the rose wine. It seemed that when Yang Jian and the great sage had gone to find Fairy Zixia, there were many things he didn't know. Chapter 1480. Gods were wise, but not strong. Yao were the exact opposite. As a result, in the eyes of the gods, Yao were barbarians. When it came to food, the gods were especially prejudiced against Yao. They said their food tasted like wax. But now, Yizichin couldn't disagree. Perhaps it had to do with the culture of the north, but at the very least, the Rose House's signature dishes were worthy of praise. The table was full of delicacies, but the great sage didn't touch a single bite. He didn't even take a few sips of rose brew. Yizichin was enjoying his meal. When he heard this, he arched his brows, lifted his bowl, and took another sip of rose brew. When he saw the great sage hesitate, he silently lowered his head. Yizichin didn't dare say he could guess what the great sage was thinking, but he was pretty close. Food is the most important thing to the people. We've been traveling for so long without even a drop of water. Now that we're in a northern city, we can at least rest and replenish our supplies. When Yizichin said that, the great sage didn't know how to argue. "Don't overthink things. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. The tavern has always been the easiest and fastest way to get information. There are all sorts of people here, so if we stay here, we might get some unexpected information." "What else do you need? Didn't the Hermit Emperor explain things to you before coming here?" asked the great sage. "You're right," Yizichin said. Yizichin glared at him in surprise, then nodded. The Hermit Emperor really didn't explain things too clearly. He just gave me a general direction, then told me I'd find out once I got to the north. When he heard that, the great sage couldn't help but frown. Then why did you come to the north? Shoo, this isn't the place to talk about that. The great sage glanced at the customers in the tavern, but could only nod and drop the subject. However, whenever he sat in the tavern, he felt uneasy. Take your time tasting. I'm going out for a stroll. Without further ado, the great sage got up and left. Before he could take more than a few steps, he suddenly stopped. Yizichin couldn't help but freeze as well. Every customer in the tavern froze for a few breaths of time. What a powerful pressure! Yizichin squinted his eyes and looked out the window. At that moment, a fleet of cars passed by the restaurant, causing the pedestrians and vendors to subconsciously move to the side of the road. The entire convoy was made up of scarlet flame horses, leaving a long trail of flaming footprints on the entire street. Red ribbons were tied around the carriages, and there were musicians beating gongs and drums around the carriages. It was a very festive scene. Is the demon race's wedding ceremony so old-fashioned? After getting a rough idea of the situation, Yizichin couldn't help but purse his lips into a smile. They even have a guard of honor? But just because they have a few peak diviners or rulers, they're a bit too intimidating. It was obviously a wedding procession, but the scarlet flame horse was rampaging through the street. Most of the pedestrians and peddlers were chased to the side of the street, and they looked very miserable. There were also many peddlers who did not evacuate in time, and the spirit herbs on their stalls were trampled to pieces by the wedding procession. All of you, scram! The wedding procession glared at them angrily. The scarlet flame horse, which was clearly saddled, seemed to have broken free of its reins. It galloped down the street, leaving behind long, flaming footprints. The pedestrians scrambled out of the way, but at that moment a child fell to the ground. The scarlet flame horse was as fast as a half-step diviner. The child was only a human immortal, so he was about to be trampled. Whoosh! A silver longsword pierced through the air, and the blade of the sword was embedded into the ground, making buzzing sounds. The scarlet flame horse whinnied in fright. The entire wedding procession came to a halt. Little friend, are you all right? Yizichin, who'd just been in the restaurant, appeared in front of the child. He smiled and patted him on the head. At the same time, a woman ran over in a panic. Little you. The woman called the child's name. After confirming that the child was unharmed, she turned to Yizichin and thanked him gratefully. Hurry up and thank our benefactor, said the woman to the child. Thank you, benefactor. The child bowed to Yizichin in his childish voice. Yizichin couldn't help but chuckle. No worries. You seem to be a member of the god race, right? What a coincidence, so am I. Yizichin glanced at the confused child. Hurry up and take him away. In the future, you have to be more careful with children. Tears of gratitude streamed down her face as she led the child away. Yizichin twisted his neck and pulled the silver longsword from the ground. He glanced indifferently at the scarlet flame horse procession, but said nothing. He'd suddenly appeared here from the restaurant in order to save the life of the child with the blood of the god race. As for everything else, this wasn't the god race's territory, so he couldn't be bothered to care. Just as he was about to leave, someone from the wedding procession shouted angrily, "Halt!" Yizichin glanced over indifferently, then saw the young man walk towards him angrily. Not long later, Yizichin recognized him. He was the one who had driven the extremely aggressive scarlet flame horse. The youth wore embroidered robes, and Yizichin could faintly make out the fluctuations of a formation. He was obviously a young master. As he roared, several people followed him. Judging from their auras, the person who'd made him feel slightly pressured wasn't among them. What? Asked Yizichin calmly. You dare ask what? Do you know whose wedding procession you're blocking? Said the youth arrogantly. I don't know, and I'm too lazy to know. Yizichin shrugged. If you're going to blame me for what happened just now, then I really feel wronged. Just now I stepped in to protect you. If I hadn't intervened, your scarlet flame horse would have trampled that child to death. You should be thanking me. You should be thanking me. Why do I feel like you're here to denounce me? Help me block a calamity. The young man laughed out loud. Do you know who I am? Do you know that you've delayed my big brother's wedding procession? Then hurry up and leave. What are you just standing there for? Yi Zichen stepped aside. Leave? Laozi's precious scarlet flame horse was startled. Do you think it's over just like that? Said the youth. Hearing that, Yi Zichen was stunned, then couldn't help but be speechless. Seriously? We're in the same world, the same second generation. Are you rich young masters all so overbearing? Then you're talking about compensation with me now, and not caring about your big brother's wedding procession? Yi Zichen quickly admitted defeat when he saw the young master's expression turn dark. Fine, fine, fine. Don't be angry. Compensation, compensation. It's just compensation. Brothers, don't get angry. But before that, can you let me see your scarlet flame horse? Who knows if it's a hybrid or not? You, Lord, don't be angry, Yi Zichen smiled coyly. This scarlet flame horse is rather expensive. I definitely won't be willing to pay for it. Don't you think so? I'll go and inspect it. Hego. Disdain flashed across the youth's eyes. As he watched Yi Zichen walk towards the scarlet flame horse, he muttered. You're trying to be a hero with someone else, but you don't know how much you're worth. Hearing that, Yi Zichen didn't get angry. He merely walked in front of the scarlet flame horse with a chuckle and took a closer look. It really is a scarlet flame horse. Naturally, the young man said arrogantly. Since you know it's a scarlet flame horse, then compensate. I can pay for it, but you said your horse was frightened. How do you calculate the compensation for psychological damage? That's no good, there's no way to give a fair price. Yi Zichen shook his head with a smile. So you're saying that you don't want to compensate? The young man's gaze turned cold. If you don't want to compensate, then you have to think about it properly. With that, the people behind the young man walked out. Yi Zichen hurriedly reached out his hand. Come on, let's go. Yi Zichen quickly reached out his hand. AI, don't. Isn't it just compensation? We have money. I'm just saying, without a proper department to judge the mental damage fee, who should pay more or less? I don't like to take advantage of others. But clearly, you can't go find a professional to judge it with me. You're in a hurry to give it to your big brother, right? Isn't it? What exactly do you want? The young man asked. I just want it to be fair. Yi Zichen squinted his eyes and smiled. Yi Zichen squinted his eyes and smiled, then gently patted the scarlet flame horse. Chapter 1481. The scarlet flame horse fell to the ground. No blood flowed out of its mouth and nose, but the flames beneath its feet and on its head had already dimmed. It was clearly dead. Yi Zichen looked at the youth with a smile. The people on the street all opened their eyes wide. To be able to use a scarlet flame horse to escort the bride, he definitely had a powerful background. However, Yi Zichen had killed the scarlet flame horse right in front of everyone. When the flames on the scarlet flame horse were completely extinguished, the youth's expression was so dark that it seemed like it was about to drip water. The people on the street all knew that this matter definitely wasn't going to end peacefully. The mother and son duo that Yi Zichen had saved stopped by the side of the street and secretly worried for their benefactor. Yi Zichen acted as if he didn't notice the youth's change in mood. His eyes were filled with a warm smile as he rubbed his ring. How much did you buy this scarlet flame horse for? Tell me a number and I'll give it to you right now. You're seeking death. As the youth roared, the thugs behind him instantly blocked Yi Zichen's path of retreat. What are you doing? Didn't you want compensation? It's not like I won't compensate you. Why did you call these people over? Are they going to beat me up? Yi Zichen shrunk his neck. You really are refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. You killed the scarlet flame horse of our city lord's manor. If we just compensate and let this go, then where is the face of the city lord's manor? said the youth sinisterly. Yi Zichen seemed to understand. So it's not just about compensation. There's also a matter of face? That makes things much easier. The youth frowned. Instantly, Yi Zichen's smile vanished, and a silver longsword appeared in his hand. His aura surged outwards like waves. All of a sudden, the pupils of the people on the street, as well as the thugs blocking Yi Zichen's path of retreat, and the youth constricted. I blocked a calamity for you, yet you keep causing trouble for me. Shouldn't I settle the matter of face with you? The shockwave suddenly burst out, and the groom and his thugs were all sent flying by the shockwave. At that moment, several figures leapt out of the carriages in the middle of the procession and landed beside the youth. Little, before they could speak, a streak of golden light suddenly appeared beside Yi Zichen. It was the great sage. The great sage had only subtly released his aura before withdrawing it back into his body. However, even though it was just a fleeting movement, it was still seen through by the others. They forcefully swallowed the rest of their words. Friend, we are from the City Lord Mansion of Violet Glass City. All of this might be a misunderstanding. A middle-aged man walked out of the group. Yi Zichen glanced at him indifferently, and immediately knew that the pressure he felt at the very beginning was released by this middle-aged man. As he spoke, the middle-aged man also released his aura. Ruler. The corners of Yi Zichen's lips curled up. He understood that the middle-aged man was subtly trying to tell him that he was a ruler. If they fought, it wouldn't benefit either of them. However, Yi Zichen knew full well that although he was a ruler, he'd only just entered. Great Sage, it was an overlord tier. Of course, Yi Zichen didn't want to cause trouble. He had an important purpose for coming here, so there was no need for him to seek unnecessary trouble. Purple Jade City Lord Mansion. It sounded like a deterrent. Yi Zichen retracted his aura. When the middle-aged man sensed this, he let out a long sigh of relief. Their thoughts were the same as Yi Zichen's. They didn't want to cause trouble either. They were here to escort the bride. I also think this is a misunderstanding, but your young master brought up the issue of face, so I decided to pay attention to my own face as well. Our young master is inexperienced, so please. Don't say that, interrupted Yi Zichen coldly. You should be thanking me. Escorting the bride is a joyous occasion, but just now, your young master nearly ruined your joyous occasion. I only didn't cause your scarlet horse to bleed, out of respect for you. Understand? I understand. The middle-aged man nodded. Since you all think this is a misunderstanding, let's drop the matter. Don't delay your wedding. With that, Yi Zichen put his silver sword away, then walked back to the restaurant with the great sage without so much as a backward glance. The middle-aged man smiled as he watched them leave, then sighed and glanced at the troublemaker. He shook his head and called for the procession to continue onward. Sirs, you're back. When they returned to the restaurant, they saw a waiter standing by the door. When he saw Yi Zichen and the great sage return, the waiter beamed with delight and greeted them warmly. Are you worried we'd run off without paying? Laughed Yi Zichen. We're not that kind of people. Look at what you're saying. How could I possibly think that? The waiter beamed. Given your temperament, you're definitely not that kind of person. Even if you don't return, it's just that the procession missed you and you forgot to pay the bill. You're quite good at talking. Then why were you waiting at the door? Asked Yi Zichen. I'm just worried about the two of you. That was someone from Violet Yen City's City Lord's mansion. I was truly afraid that the two of you would have a conflict with them. That's why I've been waiting at the entrance, said the waiter. The waiter's words were flawless. No one could find fault with them. Yi Zichen returned to his table, sat down, and turned to the waiter. Just now, you said they were from Purple Jade City's City Lord's manor. You know them too? How could I not? Purple Jade City is our neighboring city. Quite a few of the House of Rose's customers come from there, said the waiter. Purple Jade City is one of the 16 major cities in the Northern Kingdom. Forget me, even if you asked anyone on the street, they'd probably know about the city lord's manor. And here I thought you were going to say that Purple Jade City wanted to form a marriage alliance with your city. That's when you'd find out, laughed Yizichin. Our city isn't that lucky, said the waiter. Isn't it a marriage alliance with your city? Yizichin arched his brows. Then do you know who they're marrying? They made such a big show, and it seems they're in a hurry. Of course I know. A marriage alliance with Purple Jade City's city lord is a big deal, said the waiter. Tell me. Yizichin had nothing better to do, and he'd just caused a ruckus with Purple Jade City's people. He was willing to learn more about this marriage alliance. Who knew, he might even learn something unexpected. Purple Jade City wants to form a marriage alliance with Blue Wave City's Z family? Who? Say that again? The great sage slammed the table fiercely, causing everyone in the restaurant to be shocked. However, when they saw that it was the great sage, they didn't dare say anything. The waiter was stunned into silence. After a long while, he gulped and said, Blue Wave City's Z family? This is a major event in the Northern Kingdom. The son of Purple Jade City's city lord is marrying Zixia of Blue Wave City's Z family in 2 days. This. Chapter 1482. At the mention of Fairy Zixia, Yizichin froze. As far as he could remember, Fairy Zixia's final destination was the Supreme Treasure. Although the ending of that movie had been barely satisfactory, Yizichin's feelings for the Supreme Treasure and Fairy Zixia had long since been ingrained in his heart. That was until he met the great sage who'd removed the golden band tightening curse and learned of Fairy Zixia's existence. Then he found out that the two of them had truly gone through a love-hate relationship, and now he heard with his own ears that Fairy Zixia was about to marry the son of Xian City's city lord. All of a sudden, Yizichin felt a bit of regret. Why did I ask so nicely? If he hadn't asked, they wouldn't have known it was Zixia, and the great sage wouldn't have. Yizichin slammed the table, stood up, and glared at the great sage. The waiter was terrified beyond belief. He also realized that he might have said something that he shouldn't have and angered the two masters. The waiter gulped and shrunk his neck. He didn't even dare breathe too loudly. Yizichin rose to his feet and sighed, then glanced at the great sage. Great sage! Yizichin wanted to say something, but he couldn't get a single word out of his mouth. The great sage's aura surged. How could heaven and earth possibly withstand the fury of an imperial emperor? The surging spiritual pressure caused the hair of the diners in the restaurant to stand on end. Their eyes trembled as they looked at the furious great sage. The wine jugs filled with rose wine exploded under the pressure. Fine nectar flowed out of the jugs. The great sage's fury enveloped the entire city. Countless experts who were close to or had already stepped into the ruler realm instinctively rushed toward the restaurant. Despite themselves, a chill ran from the soles of their feet to the top of their skulls. In terms of strength, this city couldn't even compare to the third tier of the Northern Kingdom. In the past, diviner-level experts were extraordinary existences here. Now that the great sage was releasing spiritual pressure that was at least at the imperial emperor level, the entire city, including the city lord's manor, fell into a state of panic. The scarlet flame horse of the wedding procession hadn't even left the city yet. The young man who'd held a grudge against the great sage stared blankly at the spiritual pressure for a long while. Enveloped by this spiritual pressure, his skin felt stinging pain all over his body. At this moment, he felt as if he had fallen into a demon's lair, and he was an ant crawling under the ancient demon king. Now do you understand why I didn't let you cause trouble for them? The only sovereign in the escort party stepped forward. With a wave of his hand, he dispelled the surging spiritual pressure and urged the escort party to leave the city as soon as possible. Only then did he speak to the young man. Just based on this spiritual pressure, I'm no match for him. If you had continued to be so stubborn, let alone me, even your father wouldn't have been able to save you. Do you understand? Even with the middle-aged man's protection, the young man's eyes flickered as if he had suffered an extreme shock. Just now, when he'd left, he'd blamed the middle-aged man and secretly hated the great sage and Yizichin. It was even to the extent that he'd thought of investigating their identities once he returned to Violet Yen City. When the time comes, I'll settle the score. Now he was truly afraid. The escort party left the city in a grandiose procession, but the people in the tavern were already prostrating themselves on the ground. Although the great sage's fury wasn't directed at them, being so close to an imperial emperor's wrath wasn't something mere sky supremes could withstand. Zixua's wedding had driven the great sage mad. From the golden light in his eyes, Yizichin could tell that he wasn't listening to him at all. When Yizichin saw the customer's expressions, he knit his brows and spread his divine power outwards. Given his current cultivation, he naturally couldn't completely neutralize the great sage's fury, but at the very least, he could make the people in the city feel a little better. But at this moment, the monstrous rage that made people tremble suddenly disappeared from the world. Countless diviners and rulers who'd lived in seclusion let out long sighs of relief. Considering the great sage's fury just now, they'd truly been worried that the great sage would destroy the entire city in a fit of rage. When the diners in the tavern felt the pressure disappear, they all crawled up from the ground and ran out of the tavern in a panic. Most of them hadn't paid their bills yet, but the waiters didn't have the spare energy to bicker with them. They trembled as they hid in a corner of the tavern, not daring to even glance at the great sage. The pressure had vanished so abruptly that even Yizichin froze for a moment before retracting his divine power. He looked at the great sage, who'd already returned to his chair. The red in his eyes had long since vanished, and the anger on his face had vanished as well. Instead, he looked utterly dejected. "So that's how it is," the great sage muttered dejectedly. He was angry at how abruptly this news had arrived. But now, inexplicably, he'd returned to normal. It was because he remembered what Zixia's older brother had told him when he'd gone looking for her. "You mean with the son of Violet Yen City's city lord?" The great sage smiled indifferently, then reached into the air and pulled out an exquisite wooden box. Yizichin looked at it. The instant he opened it, his pupils constricted. Inside was a long, purple and white robe made of silk. If he wasn't mistaken, this was the robe he'd worn back when he'd obtained the supreme treasure. Even after thousands of years, the robe was still perfectly preserved. The great sage's eyes reddened. He carefully touched the robe, and pure white tears welled up in his eyes. He slammed the box shut, then returned it to the void. Yizichin, who'd seen it all with his own eyes, wanted to say something, but the great sage stopped him. "Don't mention it. Yizi, let's drink." With that, the great sage roared without so much as turning his head. "Waiter, bring out the wine." The great sage's spiritual pressure had long since crushed all the rose brew in the tavern. The waiters had no idea what to do. At that moment, Yizichin took out several jugs of wine he'd bought in the god realm and handed them to the great sage. The great sage said nothing. He tilted his head back and poured the wine into his mouth. He didn't need the rose brew right now. He just wanted to get drunk. One day and one night, the House of Rose didn't receive any more customers. Yizichin stayed by the great sage's side the entire time. Who knew how much wine he drank? Who knew how many times the great sage's tears welled up in his eyes? His heart was undoubtedly in pain. He wanted to get drunk. But he was already an emperor. How could he get drunk? The more he drank, the more clear-headed he became. The more clear-headed he became, the more he'd remember Zixia's upcoming wedding. "Waiter!" the great sage called out. The waiter trembled as he walked over. The newcomer was the same stalwart man. He'd interacted with the great sage before, so it was only natural that the waiter would send him. "Sir, what are your orders? Is it the rose brew? We've already gotten new ones." The great sage smiled sadly and shook his head. He glanced at the waiter, whose legs were trembling uncontrollably. "When will the wedding be held in Zixia City?" Chapter 1483. No one knew what the great sage was thinking. After leaving behind enough aureus to make up for the restaurant's losses, Yi Zichen and the great sage set out for Fairy Zixa's wedding was about to take place in Xian City. The great sage said nothing along the way. Before leaving, Yi Zichen thought he wanted to steal the wedding. If he really wanted to, Yi Zichen would definitely stand firmly by his side and steal the wedding. No matter what the great sage thought, in his heart, Zixia and the supreme treasure should be together. Until they arrived in Xian City. It was obvious this was a grand occasion. From the first hour of the day, the entire city bustled with activity. Guests streamed in from all four gates. By the second hour of the day, it was like a grand banquet. The entire city lord's manor was decorated with lanterns and banners. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Guests laughed and chatted, and the wedding venue was decorated with festive red satin. The character for Happy was plastered all over the manor. At the third hour of the day, the guests all took their seats, and the musicians began to play joyous music. But even now, the great sage didn't make a single move. He simply stood silently on an auspicious cloud, watching everything unfold from above. Yi Zichen had clearly found Fairy Zixa's room long ago. Yi Zichen had sensed the number of experts present. Although there were quite a few experts attending the wedding, it wasn't impossible for them to steal the wedding. He was practically prepared to contact the experts of the God realm, but the great sage showed no signs of wanting to steal the wedding. Later, he understood. The great sage had never intended to steal the wedding. He was thinking. He just watched quietly, not disturbing them in the slightest. In Zixia Fairy's room, a maid was dressing her up. Noon was the auspicious time for the wedding, and the city lord of Xian City had invited many important figures of the monster race, so her makeup must be exquisite to the extreme. There was also a young man in armor standing in the room. Wearing such an austere armor on a wedding day like this was definitely not appropriate. However, he was used to this sort of attire, so no one really minded. My little sister really looks good when she's dressed up. The young man smiled as he looked at Zixia's reflection in the mirror and nodded repeatedly. Zixia's wedding was supposed to be attended by the elders of the clan, but due to some special circumstances, the elders of the clan were unable to make it, so he, as her elder brother, had to come and be the elder of the bride's side. Actually, there was a deeper reason for sending him here. He was the only one in the clan who could catch Zixia, who had escaped several times. Now it seemed that he was accompanying his sister to dress up, but in fact, the city lord had already taken his seat at the wedding elders' table. He stayed here to keep an eye on Zixia, in case she took this opportunity to sneak away. Against your will? Zixia, who was sitting in front of the mirror, smiled faintly and looked at the young man in the mirror. The elders of both sides have already taken their seats, yet you're still staring at me. Are you afraid that I'll take advantage of this time to run away again? Actually, I feel that you don't have to worry so much. The city lord's mansion has more spies than our family. Even if I wanted to run, I couldn't. Little sister. The young man frowned. This was the city lord's mansion. Although the people who dressed him were from the Z clan, the people outside were from the city lord's mansion. If the city lord knew about this, it would be terrible. Alright, hurry up and go out. I promise you that I won't run away. I'll follow the matchmaker to get married beautifully. I definitely won't embarrass you. At this point, I don't want to run anymore. Zixia's eyes were filled with a gloomy smile. Seeing this, the young man couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. He loved Zixia dearly, ever since she was a child. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken her out to play when she became a sovereign. If it was possible, he would rather arrange a marriage for Zixia. If it wasn't for the changes in the clan and the elders' worried faces, he wouldn't have forced his sister to do something she didn't like. Before father left, he asked me to give this to you before you get married. The young man sighed and took out a small wooden box from his ring. He placed it on Zixia's dressing table. Xia didn't even look at it. Instead, she saw the young man silently shake his head through the mirror. If you want to blame someone, blame your brother for being useless. I couldn't block the disaster in the clan by myself. I could only sacrifice you in exchange for the stability of the clan. Don't talk about this, Xia said. That's enough. I'm leaving. The young man smiled bitterly, then turned around and instructed the maids to make sure Xia looked beautiful. Then he walked out of the room. Once he was gone, Xia reached into her robes and reached out with her lily-white hands. She picked up the small wooden box and opened it. Inside the box was a fragment of a key. It looked like an antique that had existed for many years. After a few glances, Xia closed the box and put it away. When she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes were filled with desolation. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened. He instinctively touched the item in his robes, but his gaze was fixed on Fairy Xia's room in the city lord's manor. The great sage didn't notice Yi Zichen's strange expression, but Yi Zichen frowned as he looked at the room. Just now, he'd clearly sensed the item in his robes ripple, but it quickly disappeared. Could I have sensed it wrong? Yi Zichen couldn't help but wonder to himself. He shook his head and cast aside all distracting thoughts. However, he still glanced at the room from time to time. Right at this moment, the phone in his arms rang. Not wanting to disturb the great sage, Yi Zichen gripped his phone and walked 100 meters away. He opened his social media app and saw that it wasn't anyone who'd sent him a message. However, there was a red one on his new contact list. He hadn't seen this in a long time. He clicked on his new contact list and looked at the person who'd sent him a friend request. Then, he glanced at the message. I am the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen stared blankly for several breaths of time. He repeatedly confirmed the message, then clicked on his profile picture. It really is the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen couldn't help but be shocked by Zhuomo's efficiency. This was way too fast. He'd only been in the Yao realm for a few days, yet he'd already promoted his phone to the Hermit Emperor's level? No. If it were purely for promotion, he couldn't possibly have his own social media ID. But no matter what, there was a 90% chance that the person who'd added him was the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen didn't dare hesitate. He hurriedly accepted the message. Little friend Yi, I am the Hermit Emperor. The Hermit Emperor's message popped up on the screen. Before long. This little gadget you're researching is pretty interesting. How is it? Are you in the north yet? Chapter 1484. Yi Zichen glanced at the wedding beneath his feet, then at the Hermit Emperor's message. As if he could predict the future, everything seemed to be in the plan of this god clan's living fossil senior. You're right. We're currently in the sky above Xian City's city lord's manor. After sending that message, Yi Zichen sent another. It seems that what you said to me back then was actually referring to this wedding, right? But how did you know we'd definitely be here? Before long, the Hermit Emperor sent him a message. Don't think too much about it. I didn't know you'd make it to Xian City. It was all a coincidence. Yi Zichen didn't reply, but he knew the Hermit Emperor would surely send him more. As expected, after a few breaths of time, he received several more messages. If you hadn't gone to Xian City, I would have let you go. But now, it seems that since you guys are already here, we can save a lot of trouble. Ding dong. After sending the message, a red packet suddenly appeared in his chat box. Yi Zichen clicked on it and opened it. Teleportation Talisman X1. This is my teleportation talisman. If you need it, you can crush it. Who knows, I might be able to save your lives. However, it's best not to use it if possible. I'm getting old, and traveling through space puts a lot of strain on my body. My bones can't take it. When he saw the Hermit Emperor's message, Yi Zichen's expression darkened. He'd sent me a red packet, then told me not to use it if possible. In that case, wouldn't it be fine if I didn't send it? However, from the moment the Hermit Emperor sent it, Yi Zichen sensed that this wedding wasn't as simple as it seemed. Is it dangerous? Yi Zichen scanned the city lord's manor with his divine sense. In truth, there weren't that many experts in the manor. Only a few people could threaten him and the great sage. The others were all guests. They'd come to watch the ceremony, so they most likely wouldn't attack rashly. However, Yi Zichen was certain that there was danger lurking behind this wedding. It was dangerous enough to threaten his and the great sage's safety. Otherwise, the Hermit Emperor wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to create a teleportation talisman and send it to him in red packet. This old man isn't used to your new toys, so I won't tell you about them. The Hermit Emperor sent yet another message, and then his profile picture turned gray. It looked like he'd logged off. Previously, this social media app hadn't developed the ability to turn offline profile pictures gray. Now, it seemed like the development team from the Heavenly Court had improved it again. Yi Zichen couldn't help but scratch his head when he left without explaining everything. But from this brief conversation, he had a rough idea of what was going on. There was also the undulation he felt just now. If he was not mistaken, the item he was looking for in the north would appear at this wedding. Yi Zichen's heart sank as he put his phone back into his pocket. After his conversation with the Hermit Emperor, Yi Zichen gradually began to take the wedding even more seriously. Not only the wedding venue, but the entire Xian city was also on high alert. "You're back." The great sage tilted his head and glanced at Yi Zichen. When Yi Zichen heard this, he nodded. "What happened?" "Nothing. How's the wedding going?" Yi Zichen didn't mention his conversation with the Hermit Emperor to the great sage. For one, he wasn't completely sure of the situation yet. For another, he didn't want to distract the great sage. As expected, the great sage didn't ask any further questions. Instead, he looked back at the wedding venue. The guests had already returned to their seats, and rainbow-colored flower petals fell from the sky above the city lord's manor onto the long red carpet. Fairy Zixia wore a red wedding gown and a veil over her head. She placed her hand on the matchmaker's wrist and walked gracefully towards the center of the wedding venue. The eldest son of the city lord's eldest son stood atop the wedding platform, wearing a red sash across his chest. His face was full of happiness and excitement, and his eyes had been fixed on Zixia Fairy, never moving away. "How wonderful!" The great sage pursed his lips and sighed. You could see the smile on his face. This was his best wishes for Fairy Zixia. However, his eyes were filled with desolation. He was sighing. The groom of this wedding wasn't him. In truth, before coming to the Yao realm, the great sage had resolved not to pay attention to any news about Zixia. Everyone was fine and he wouldn't disturb her. However, when he found out she was about to get married, he found it hard to suppress his emotions. So he thought, let's come and take a look. Who knows, after seeing her, he might really give up on her. Little did he know, the more he watched, the more heartbroken he felt. When he heard the great sage's sigh, Yi Zichen patted him on the shoulder, then sat down beside him and watched. By now, Fairy Zixia had already followed the matchmaker to the stage. The city lord's son handed them the sash, and the two of them each took one end of the sash. Then, they slowly walked to the front of the hall. The city lord of Xian City was a stocky man named Hui Lu. He'd given his name very casually. He was the sixth child in his family, so he'd taken on this name. In truth, his sturdiness had something to do with his true form. His true form was a grizzly bear, and he was one of the few experts in the north who could transform into his ancestral form. The woman was naturally Fairy Zixia's older brother. Even now, he was still clad in his silver-white armor. Even though he'd done his best to keep his aura gentle, he still couldn't hide the killing intent emanating from his armor. The wedding's master of ceremonies spoke the same opening words and lines that had never changed since time immemorial. Under the blessings of all the guests, Fairy Zixia and the city lord's son bowed to the heavens and the earth, then to the hall, until the couple bowed to each other. The city lord's son lowered his head, But Fairy Zixia suddenly stopped. Everyone was waiting for Zixia Fairy to make her last salute, but she had yet to do so. The guests couldn't help but be stunned. The city lord of Xian City frowned, while the city lord's son looked at Fairy Zixia in confusion. At the same time, he noticed that Fairy Zixia's hand, which was holding the sash, was trembling violently. "Zixia?" the city lord's son asked tentatively. "Are you feeling unwell? If you aren't, then hurry up and bow, then you can go back and rest." Fairy Zixia said nothing. The city lord's frown deepened, and he glanced at his brother several times. "Zixia!" the young man shouted in a low voice. "Don't mess around. Hurry up and bow, then you can do whatever you want. Don't mess around here. Everyone here is a big shot of the north. If you make a scene, the city lord will lose face, and it won't do our family any good. Didn't you promise me that you'd be good? Are they married?" "I regret it." Chapter 1485. She threw down the red veil and tried to escape from the city lord's mansion. The guests were in an uproar, and the city lord's face was so ugly that it looked like it was about to drip water. Zixia's elder brother also frowned and smiled awkwardly at the city lord. Then, he stared at the Z clan members who came with Zixia from Blue Wave City. "Why aren't you stopping her?" Several Sky Supreme experts chased after her. Zixia's brother stomped down hard and clenched his right hand. Zixia, who hadn't even run a few hundred meters, was suddenly caught by an invisible force. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. At the same time, the Z family members caught her and brought her back to the wedding platform. "It's useless even if you catch me. I don't want to get married. Even if you force me to get married today, as long as you give me a chance in the future, I'll still run. If you have the guts, keep an eye on me day and night. Don't let me get a chance." Zixia Fairy glared at him and shouted angrily. The guests who had come to watch the ceremony looked on blankly. "Zixia," the young man shouted. "Ziyun, this is what your Z family taught you." The city lord of Xian City was furious. He glared at Zixia's brother and shouted, "Is your Z family deliberately trying to humiliate me?" "City lord, don't be angry. Zixia is..." Before Ziyun could finish speaking, the city lord's son stepped forward and asked Zixia, "Zixia, don't be angry." "Zixia, why do you say that? Are you worried that I'll be like the other young masters and have 3 wives and 4 concubines and treat you badly? I swear that I, Hui Hua, will only marry you in this life and treat you wholeheartedly." Zixia looked back at the city lord's son. "I'm not saying you're bad, nor am I targeting you. It's just that I already have someone in my heart. He told me a long time ago that one day he would come to marry me on a 7-colored auspicious cloud. From that moment on, I gave my heart to him. I won't fall in love with anyone else." Whoosh! In an instant, the entire wedding hall was in an uproar. When Zixia said those words, it was no longer a simple matter of face. It was a direct slap to City Lord Ziyan's face. The veins on Hui Lu's arms, neck and forehead all popped out. His eyes were bloodshot and his aura surged. His entire person was on the verge of exploding. At the same time, in the sky above the City Lord's mansion in Xian City, Fairy Zixia's words stunned Yi Zichen as well. How much courage did it take to say something like that in front of so many powerful beings on such an occasion? Her words proved how deep her feelings for the great sage were. He looked at the great sage beside him. The great sage, who was sitting on the cloud, was also trembling slightly. When he noticed Yi Zichen's gaze, he quickly looked away and secretly wiped his eyes. He was wiping away his tears, however. He still did not move. The farce at the wedding ceremony was still developing in the most unexpected direction. The city lord was furious, the city lord's son was at a loss, and Zixia Fairy was determined. At this moment, someone had to step forward and put an end to this farce. Otherwise, this wedding would become the laughingstock of the entire Yao race. Even though it was already that way. "Zixia, shut up," roared Ziyun. Why should I shut up? If I like it, then I like it. If I don't like it, then I don't like it. What right do you have to force me to do something I don't like? What right do you have? I told you to shut up. With a crisp slap, Ziyun slapped Xia across the face. He didn't hold back in the slightest. A trickle of blood leaked from the corners of Xia's mouth. The guests froze. Even Xia, who'd been trying to defend herself, froze for a few seconds. Then, a tragic smile spread across her face. Go ahead and hit me. Even if you beat me to death. I won't get married. As soon as he'd slapped her, Ziyun somewhat regretted it. This was the first time he'd ever hit her. No matter how much trouble she'd caused in the past, the most he'd done was scold her and imprison her for a few days. But now was different. This wasn't the Z family. This was the city lord's manor in Xian City. This was a wedding ceremony attended by guests from all over the Northern Empire. Ziyun forced down the pain in her heart and suppressed her worries. Then, she forced a heart of stone and shouted angrily. You have to get married whether you want to or not. With that, he turned to the Z family clansmen and shouted, You have to get married whether you want to or not. Help the young miss perform the ceremony. Where are we now? You've bowed 3 times already, haven't you? Let's continue. The Z family clansman really did grab Xia's head and forcefully pushed her back down. Even if you force me to bow to heaven and earth, I absolutely won't fall in love with this city lord's son. My sweetheart is the supreme treasure. He'll step on a rainbow cloud to marry me. He's my real husband. Even if you force me to bow to heaven and earth now, it's useless. What are you standing around for? Let's continue, roared Ziyun. Ziyun returned to his seat in the hall and watched the wedding with an ashen expression. The city lord's son thought for a moment, then lowered his head as well. The ceremony ended. When the master of ceremonies saw this, he hurriedly said, The ceremony is complete. Let's enter the bridal chamber. Yi Zichen could see the great sage's fists clenched, but he endured. Great sage. Up in the clouds, the great sage said nothing. He didn't even make eye contact. He just sat on the clouds and watched the wedding slowly move forward. You can't hold me down. You can't. The supreme treasure will come to marry me. Until he comes, I'll wait for him. Even though she was being held captive, Fairy Xia gnashed her teeth and roared at Ziyun. The surrounding guests shook their heads inwardly. When Xian City's city lord, Hui Lu, finished bowing, waved his right hand and left the hall. He no longer had the face to drink with the other guests. He'd lost all face. Suddenly, the sky darkened. The great sage looked ahead, but Yi Zichen knit his brows. When he spread out his divine sense, he sensed at least a dozen rulers' auras. The guests, the departing city lord Hui Lu, Ziyun, and the others. Their expressions were solemn as they looked ahead. Under the black fog that covered the sun, a dozen or so people with sharp horns on their heads and dark purple skin slowly walked out. In front of them, there was a person wearing a black cloak walking at the very front. Demons! The guests were astonished. Hui Lu, who'd only taken a few steps, stopped and knit his brows. Friends of the demon race, why have you come to the Xian City Lord's manor? Today is my son's wedding. It's not convenient for us to receive you. Chapter 1486. The Northern Kingdom liked to be friends with humans, but that didn't mean they were willing to live in harmony with the demons. On the contrary, the Northern Kingdom of the Yao clan was disgusted by the demons. The sudden invasion of the demons, with such a large number of experts, caused the guests to frown deeply. This was especially true for Hui Lu, the city lord of Xian City. Son of a dog was a humble title for his eldest son, but if it came from someone else's mouth, it would have a completely different meaning. In the worst-case scenario, it could be interpreted as a son of a dog. Moreover, the demons and the Northern Kingdom had always been enemies, so the city lord of Xian City couldn't think positively. Our friends from the devil race have this habit of coming uninvited. It's really troublesome. Hui Lu stopped and looked at the numerous demon experts that had landed in the wedding venue. This Hui has never had any connections with the demon race, so I don't know who the demon race friends are here for. Naturally, we don't have any contact with you, City Lord Hui. A faint chuckle appeared under the loose cloak. He then turned his head and looked at Zi Yun, who had already tensed up, with an indifferent smile. He smiled indifferently and said, "We are actually old friends of the Z clan, don't you think so, young Master Zi Yun?" The moment this group of demons appeared, Zi Yun's heart trembled. Now that the other party said it so openly, it confirmed his suspicions. It really was them, but how did they get here so quickly? That's right, this is the first time we've met young Master Zi Yun, so you might not know us. However, a few of the elders in your clan are very familiar with us. As soon as he finished speaking, the black-robed man waved his hand. The devil experts behind him immediately walked up, and then they heard the black-robed devil expert laugh. "Let young Master Zi Yun see the gifts we've brought." Bang, bang, bang. 3 tied-up elders appeared in the wedding venue, their faces covered in blood and their bodies covered in wounds. These were the 3 elders of the Z clan of Blue Wave City. From their appearance, it was obvious that they had fought with these demon experts not long ago, and had even experienced inhumane treatment. Clan elders. Zi Yun gnashed his teeth and roared. Zi Xia, who was being pressed down, was also stunned for a long time. She stared fixedly at the demons in front of her. The black-robed devilish being squatted down and pulled out the cloth that had been stuffed into the mouth of one of the elders, then gently patted the unconscious elder. "Wake up, as an elder, you should at least say some congratulatory words for your junior's wedding." The elder who had been slapped in the face slowly opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he did was look at his surroundings. When he saw Zi Xia and Zi Yun in their wedding clothes, the elder's eyes instantly narrowed, and he shouted angrily, "Zi Yun, Zi Xia, run!" Dong. The black-robed devilish being stepped onto the elder's head and bent over with a sinister look in his eyes. "I woke you up so that you could say a congratulatory speech, not these words." He waved his hand again, and the devils beside him immediately stuffed the elder's mouth with a cloth and dragged him to the back. The guests were dumbfounded. From the beginning until now, this wedding ceremony had been playing out a horrifying plot. Zi Xia reneging on the engagement, the arrival of the demons, and now the roar of the Z clan elder. What kind of grievances did the demons have with the Z clan? Clan elder! As Zi Yun shouted angrily, the elder was knocked unconscious again and brought to the back. The black-robed devilish being also pursed his lips and smiled. "I wanted him to say some congratulatory words, but it's really disappointing. It seems that I was right. That thing is indeed in the hands of the 2 of you, right? In fact, we demons are very reasonable people. If you can hand over that thing readily, we won't make things difficult for you." At the same time, he smiled indifferently at the surrounding guests. "Everyone, there's no need to panic. We will definitely not hurt you. We have come here to take something from the Z clan's young master and young lady. After we take it, we will leave, and your wedding ceremony can continue." Zi Yun's pursed lips had already turned white. He now completely understood. If there was no accident, the purpose of this group of people must be the wooden box. Although he did not know what was in the wooden box, since the clan elder and his father would rather die than hand it over to the demons, then this thing must not fall into the hands of the demons. "How are the other members of the Z clan?" Zi Yun asked. "They are fine." The black-robed man smiled indifferently. "Your relatives are personally taken care of by our leader. No one can hurt them. However, whether they will be in danger or not, it all depends on the 2 of you, right?" Greenwave City's Z clan had fallen. This was definitely not good news for Zi Yun. "City Lord Hui, now that our 2 clans are connected by marriage, you," Zi Yun asked the City Lord for help. Against such a large number of devil race experts, the only thing he could rely on was Violet Yen City. "City Lord Hui, are you sure you want to get involved in this?" the black-robed demon threatened. Humph, what does the Z clan's matters have to do with my city lord? Marriage? Do you think you are worthy of mentioning marriage with me in this wedding ceremony? Hui Lu coldly glared at Zi Yun. He then turned to the Xian city lord's men and shouted, "Bring the young master back to his room. You want to use my Xian city as a spear? My Xian city will not accept this marriage." "City lord is wise," the black-robed demon said respectfully. "City lord." Zi Yun's eyes widened. Ziyan City was the Z clan's last hope. If they were to all, Zi Yun was still begging the city lord to change his mind, but Zi Xia bit her lips and pulled him back. "Brother, why are you begging them? If the wedding doesn't count, then it doesn't count. I don't like them anyway. What's the big deal? What do you know? The only one who can save our clan now is the city lord of Ziyan City. Hurry up and plead with the city lord." Zi Yun glared. "Plead? Can't you see that he's just making excuses? In fact, he just doesn't want to get into trouble. So what if he's pleading?" Zi Xia said. "Then what do you want? Do you want to rely on your supreme treasure? I think I know who has the thing we want." The black-robed demon smiled indifferently. His body turned into a blur and he reached out to grab Zi Xia. Zi Yun's pupils shrank, but at this moment, multicolored light shone in the sky, dispelling the darkness brought by the demon. A seven-colored cloud swept across the sky and landed in front of Zi Xia. With its back facing her, it reached out and grabbed the demon expert's arm. In an instant, the entire world seemed to stop. Chapter 1487. The Yao region. The sky flickered with multicolored light, so blinding that every Yao in the Yao region couldn't raise their heads to look. Enveloped by that brilliance, there was also a mountain-like pressure that enveloped the Huagua Mountain, the holy land of the apex race of the demon domain, the primate race. At the center of the pressure knelt a man in purple and white robes, his hands pressed against the ground. In front of him was an iron staff branded with a Rui scepter. The man knelt on the ground, sweating profusely, but he continued to face the pressure head-on, his eyes blazing with flames as he looked up at the dazzling sky. "Zi Xia, wait for me. Sooner or later, I'll marry you. I'll ride a rainbow cloud to marry you. Wait for me." His voice lingered for a long time. That day, the entire Yao region heard his earth-shattering roar. "Wild mountain monkey, you sure know how to talk big. You're here. You really came." Recalling the scene of their separation at that time, and looking at the reassuring figure in front of her, Zixia Fairy's tears flowed down uncontrollably. Back then, just as she was about to be taken back to her clan, she wept just like she did now. "Wild mountain monkey, you sure know how to talk big. He's no wild mountain monkey, he's the supreme treasure." Back then, Zixia cried and tried to defend him. "I believe him. My lover is a peerless hero. He'll definitely ride a rainbow cloud to marry me." Her thousands of years of waiting hadn't been in vain. He'd come. He really had come. The supreme treasure radiated a boundless heroic aura as he rode a rainbow cloud and landed in front of her. You dare hurt her?" The great sage grabbed the black-robed expert's arm and looked at him coldly. His eyes flashed with golden light. He exerted force with his arm, and with a crisp cracking sound, the arm of the demon race expert was forcefully crushed. The demon race expert glared at him in pain, but before he could stretch out his other hand, the demon race expert's eyes bulged. The great sage viciously kicked him away, sending him crashing into the wall behind him. "Fairy Zixia, are you all right?" Yi Zichen landed and asked softly. Fairy Zixia glanced at him in bewilderment, then heard him explain. "I'm the great sage's friend." "Oh, I'm fine." Zixia smiled gently and looked at the great sage's back calmly. It was just an ordinary back view, but in her eyes she could see the light that he emitted. The guests were all stupefied. To subdue a ruler with a single move, what kind of existence was this? The furious Zi Yun was stunned as well. He stared blankly at the great sage's back. Even though he couldn't see the person's face clearly, just by looking at his back, Ziyun was able to picture him in his heart. It's him? Back then, when he went to fetch Zixia back to the clan, the great sage was only a human immortal realm great demon. At that time, he was already a sky supreme. Even the gap between an immortal king and a supreme was like a chasm, let alone a great sage of the human immortal realm. Back then, Violet Cloud had only released a tiny bit of his aura, but it was something that even celestial immortals and immortal kings would find hard to endure. But it was the wild monkey that he had looked down upon back then. He was clearly in the center of his pressure, and his limbs were already on the ground from his own pressure. However, he used his trembling arms and legs to support himself from lying on the ground. He raised his head to face the golden light, looked at him and Zixia, and said those words that made him feel ridiculous, even when he came to see Zixia a few days ago. He also looked weak and was chased away with just a few words. Who would have imagined that it wouldn't be the city lord of Violet Yen City who would make a move at this moment, and it would be this wild monkey that he'd looked down upon. With the force of a thunderbolt, he forced back a devil race expert who was already at the level of a ruler. How was this possible? Ziyun was so shocked that he couldn't speak. The rest of the people also stared blankly at this scene. Seeing that the black-robed man was pushed back, the devil race experts' auras instantly exploded. The dozen or so devil race experts in front of them were all sovereigns. He released his ruler-level domain, surrounding the entire city lord mansion. Aren't you going to help him? Although Zixia Fairy had not reached the celestial being realm, she could still feel the strength of those experts of the Devil Clan, and she could also sense the changes in the surroundings. She urged Yi Zichen to hurry up and help the great sage. He didn't need to worry about this. Yi Zichen merely pursed his lips into a smile and shook his head. Your supreme treasure isn't as weak as you think. You should know that the man of your dreams is a peerless hero. Domain? The great sage, who was surrounded by his domain, smiled indifferently and pointed at the group of devil race experts. Boom! Turbulent waves of energy howled like a hurricane, blowing the entire wedding venue into shambles. The guests in the wedding hall all stared wide-eyed at the furious great sage. Many of them even recognized him. It's him. He was the one who released that oppressive aura a few days ago. He's a great Yao. He's at least a Yao king. I wonder which clan this senior is from, but his aura. Could it be that the person that Zixia mentioned earlier is this senior? Since it's this senior, why would the Z clan want to form a marriage alliance with the Hui clan? Just this senior alone is worth more than 10 Xian City Lord manors. I know, right? Judging from his aura, he's at least a great Yao king. The guests were in an uproar. Even Xian City's city lord, Hui Lu, felt pressured by this aura. It's him. Others in the manor recognized the great sage. He was the ruler-level expert the city lord had dispatched to the House of Rose. I never would have guessed he was a great Yao king. It's a good thing we didn't get into trouble that day. The most shocked of them all was Ziyun. A great Yao king. How could his cultivation have risen so quickly? When they first met, he was just a human immortal. At the time, she was a sky supreme. Now he was just about to break through to the diviner level, but he'd already. Such a small domain. What's the point of showing off in front of me? As the great sage muttered disdainfully, the great sage devoured all of the demonic ruler's domains. The great sage's wrath enveloped all of the demon experts. Who dares harm her? You or you? The great sage reached out and pointed at the demons. All of them trembled in fear and didn't dare look him in the eye. Zixia Fairy, who was protected at the back, smiled more and more brightly. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at the great sage's back. Her eyes curved like crescent moons. She was very proud and very happy. The person she loved was truly a peerless hero. So cool. Zixia Fairy rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. Looking at the purple and white robe he was wearing, she recalled all the bits and pieces of their past. In the end, she suddenly recalled what she'd been so sure of. Chapter 1488. A single man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. The dozen or so rulers of the demon race were intimidated by the great sage, and they didn't dare act rashly. They gathered together and stared solemnly at the great sage. Within his domain, they felt powerless. The situation gradually came to a stalemate. The demons didn't dare act rashly, and the great sage didn't act rashly either. The other guests had long since retreated 100 meters into the sky, watching the great sage face off against the demons. This is the spirit of a great Yao. The people in the sky couldn't help but sigh. Violet Yen City was a large city in the Northern Kingdom. However, the Northern Kingdom was a bit weaker than the Four Nations, and rulers were already incredible existences in Violet Yen City. In fact, there were no more than 30 rulers in the entire city. Now that the demons had sent a dozen rulers to cause trouble, everyone had to avoid them. From Hui Lu's performance, it was clear that even though he was the lord of Violet Yen City, he wasn't willing to offend a dozen rulers. He'd chosen to retreat. But the great sage, he'd single-handedly intimidated the rulers. His unparalleled heroism caused the guests' blood to boil. An ordinary ruler's domain is only a few meters long, but look at this senior's domain. It covers the entire city lord's mansion. Even at this level, he's probably on par with the Northern Kingdom's king. Looks like these devil race are doomed. The surrounding guests nodded in agreement. Although the demons' cultivation levels weren't low, they'd been unlucky to run into a great sage who was at least a sovereign emperor. Even in the upper three realms, sovereigns were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. Running into one could only mean that the demons were unlucky. Friend, this is a matter between us demons and the Z family. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. You're a great Yao, and we'll give you the respect you deserve, but that doesn't mean we're afraid of you. Faced with a stalemate, one of the demons began to berate the great sage. The great sage's eyes narrowed into slits. Light shone from his domain and he snorted. The demon expert who'd spoken earlier immediately felt all the divine power in his body dissipate. He felt as if a heavy hammer had smashed into his chest. His internal organs were shaken, and in an instant, his face turned deathly pale. A mouthful of purple blood sprayed from his mouth. Who are you threatening? Only then did the great sage speak indifferently. The other experts of the demon race looked on with stern expressions. Perhaps they really thought too highly of themselves. Standing in front of them was a great demon king. Even if the demon god of the demon race were here, he would have to be careful. Strength was confidence, a threat. In the first place, the other party wouldn't even put them in his eyes. The demon sovereigns carefully avoided the golden light in the great sage's eyes. At the same time, the great sage glanced at them coolly, then turned back to Zixia. When he faced Zixia, his coldness and overbearingness instantly vanished into thin air. What replaced it was a heart full of tenderness. Her eyes were as gentle as water, and there were emotions, excitement, and guilt. Are you all right? The great sage's voice sank as he gazed at Fairy Zixia, who was smiling like a flower, tears streaming down her face. Of course I'm fine. With you here, how could anything happen to me? You're my hero. You'll always protect me, won't you? Fairy Zixia's eyes filled with tears of happiness. She wanted to laugh, but her tears flowed uncontrollably. As she laughed, the smile on Zixia Fairy's face suddenly disappeared. You're finally here. Do you know how long I've waited for you? The great sage's heart ached as he looked at the weeping Zixia. Of course he knew. After all these years, he and Fairy Zixia's feelings were practically the same. He carefully wiped away the tears at the corners of Zixia Fairy's eyes. At this time, Zixia Fairy smiled through her tears. Fortunately, you didn't make me wait for nothing. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. You really are a hero of the world. I'm so happy. Ahem. At that moment, a light cough broke the tenderness between the great sage and Zixia. When he turned around, he saw Zi Yun, dressed in armor, walking over at some point. When his eyes met the great sage's, he couldn't help but look embarrassed. Brother, Fairy Zixia said, biting her lip. Her elder brother had always looked down on the great sage. She was a little worried that her brother would say something hurtful again. She didn't know that Zi Yun just shook his head with an embarrassed smile. I misjudged you. The great sage's eyes widened. He was indeed the hot-tempered type, but when it came to Fairy Zixia's relatives, he didn't want to force them to yield. He wanted to gain their true approval. Especially Zi Yun. Not long ago, when he met Zi Yun, he couldn't say a single word because of his sarcasm. Now, Joker, right? I, Zi Yun, am here to sincerely apologize to you. I was biased against you before, and my words may have hurt you. I hope you can forgive me. Zi Yun bent his waist 90 degrees. Zixia, who saw this scene, was shocked. In her mind, her brother had always been domineering, but this wedding had shown her a different version of Zi Yun. He'd begged the city lord of Xian City, and now he was apologizing to the great sage. All of this was for. Her gaze slowly shifted towards the group of demons. She already understood Zi Yun's difficulties. How can I accept such a great gift? Seeing Zi Yun bow, the great sage panicked. No matter how high his cultivation level was, in front of Zi Yun, he was just her brother-in-law. He hurriedly reached out to help his brother-in-law up, but Zi Yun bowed deeply and didn't move. I don't blame you. Get up. No, I have one more request, said Zi Yun. Just say it, said the great sage. Please save the Zi family. Zi Yun gnashed his teeth. When the great sage heard this, he looked at the demon sovereigns and thought back to what he'd seen in the clouds. He immediately understood. All right, get up. Even if you hadn't begged me, I wouldn't have left you to your own devices. Before the great sage could even take out his Rui Jingu Bang, all of a sudden, a surge of demon chi appeared in the void. Everyone instantly looked up into the void and saw a young man standing in the void. On either side of him were two people who looked like attendants. When the demons at the wedding saw him, they knelt on both knees and prostrated themselves on the ground. Holy Lord! Chapter 1489. Judging from the devout attitude of these devil race sovereigns, as well as the way they addressed him, it was obvious that this young man had an extraordinary status. They'd all assumed the great sage had the absolute advantage. Who would have guessed something like this would happen? They couldn't sense any aura from the youth's body, but the two people behind him felt just like the great sage. Especially after what he'd just said. Only now did the guests and the city lord's manor truly notice Yi Zichen's presence. The great sage was simply too dazzling. His strength as a great Yao made it impossible for the guests to look away. Now, the person the demon experts called Holy Lord was speaking directly to him. It seemed this youth they'd overlooked this entire time was no ordinary person. You again? You're really haunting me, Gu Li. Now that he'd been called out, Yi Zichen decided he might as well step forward and snorted at Gu Li, who'd already landed. If you put it like that, I'll feel a bit uncomfortable. Gu Li narrowed his eyes and laughed. You're haunting me. I wanted to tell you that no matter where I go, I'll always run into you. In truth, when I think about it, we're just too fated. Fate always arranges for us to run into each other. Think about it. Given our statuses, there's nothing strange about it, is there? Gu Li cracked his neck, then seemed to think of something else. Right, I almost forgot to congratulate you. You've broadened your horizons, haven't you? What does that have to do with you? Yi Zichen's expression was the same as ever, but his eyes flashed with cold light. Our relationship wasn't so good that we could chat. From the looks of it, these devils must have been sent over. Of course. Gu Li made no attempt to explain himself. To him, there was nothing to explain. I came here to take something. If I'm not mistaken, you came for it as well, right? Yi Zichen smiled coldly but said nothing. Gu Li's lips twitched and his gaze suddenly turned cold. Yi Zichen, I've always found our competition to be quite interesting. I'm actually quite happy to have an opponent like you on the road of life. At the very least, you don't make me feel lonely or bored. But you just had to touch something you shouldn't have. Truly. I'm furious. What does that have to do with me? Snorted Yi Zichen. Looks like you know. Instantly, Gu Li's expression contorted hideously. Just you wait, I'll snatch her back from you sooner or later. If you don't agree with me, don't say that I don't give you face. I'll leave these old guys of the Z family to you, but if you want the others to live, I'll give you one night to make arrangements. Let's meet in Blue Wave City at this time tomorrow. Of course, if you want to see a bunch of corpses, if you want them to live, bring me what I want. Go! With a wave of his hand, Gu Li and the other demon sovereigns vanished from the sky. The aura of the devil race gradually dissipated into the horizon. Zi Yun, Zi Xia, and the great sage ran to the side of the clan elders, and only relaxed when they were sure that they were still alive. Yu, the great sage, pointed at the city lord of Xian City, and Hui Lu hurriedly walked over. Although he was the lord of a city, he was definitely not a match for a greater demon king in terms of strength. Clear some rooms for us to rest in. There are always rooms available. This way, please. Hui Lu felt aggrieved. This wedding was between Zixiao and his son, but the great sage was Zixiao's former lover. However, the great sage used to be Zixiao's sweetheart. Now that the wedding had failed and she had lost face, he still had to arrange rooms for these people. But no matter how aggrieved he felt, he could only keep it in his heart. Did he dare say it? He didn't dare. A greater demon king was an existence comparable to the ruler of a country. If the great sage really wanted to destroy the city lord's manor, it wouldn't be impossible. What's more, there was a youth by his side whose cultivation he couldn't see through. He didn't dare say for sure how high his cultivation was, but he was certain that his identity was extraordinary. Hui Lu had no choice but to grit his teeth and swallow his pride. Yi, let's go. Little did they know, Yi Zichen remained in place, mulling over Gu Li's words. Her. What on earth was he referring to? It wasn't until the great sage called out to him that he came to his senses and left with them. The wedding came to an end in a farce. The other guests either settled in or left under the arrangements of the city lord's manor's clansmen. However, a masked man in the crowd glanced at Yi Zichen several times. Yi Zichen, Greenwave City. Leaving behind a low voice, that person directly left the city lord's mansion and disappeared without a trace. You don't have to worry. I got this pill from Yi. It's a divine-grade healing pill. Their injuries are already very serious. If we use the pill to nourish them, it won't be a big problem. In the room, the great sage looked at the elders lying on the bed and said to Zi Xia and Zi Yun. The Violet Jade City's city governor was very discerning, and he didn't separate them when arranging the rooms, and he chose a suite with multiple rooms for them. Zi Yun cautiously probed the necks of the clan elders several times before turning his head back with a frown. Why did you let them go just like that? That young man seems to be a person of high status and power. If we can capture him and use him to save our Z family, wouldn't it be better? The great sage fell silent. Yi Zichen couldn't help but frown. Do you know what you're saying? For Zixia's sake, the great sage could tolerate Ziyun over and over again, but that didn't mean Yi Zichen would indulge him. From the very beginning, he had always disliked Ziyun. The great sage and I came here for Zixia's sake. We helped your Z family out of respect for Fairy Zixia. Don't think too highly of yourself. You're just a diviner. Who do you think you can boss around? For the sake of the clan, you forced Fairy Zixia to marry the son of the city lord. For the sake of the clan you agreed to let the great sage and Fairy Zixia be together. It looks like you're doing this for the sake of the clan, but don't you think you're being too selfish? You want to save your clan. We can understand that and we support that. I just hope you use your brain before you speak. Here. No one owes you anything. Watch your words. Yi Zichen glared at Zi Yun and roared. Stop, Guli? If even you can tell he's an extraordinary person, do you think we can't? If he's an extraordinary person, doesn't he have experts protecting him? Do you know what level the two people behind him are? I'll tell you straight away, demon god level. Do you understand? At the mention of demon gods, Zi Yun was so shocked he couldn't speak. Chapter 1490. In the Yao Northern Kingdom, the Zi family of Bayubo City was actually just a small family clan. It was hard for them to make it into the top 10 clans in the entire city. Whether it was in terms of resources or treasures, they were far inferior to the other clans. Yi Zichen couldn't think of anything the Zi family could possibly have that was worth Gu Li's personal attention. The only thing he could think of was the fragment of the God Emperor's key. In truth, that was Yi Zichen's goal in coming to the Northern Kingdom. From Gu Li's words, he could confirm that this was indeed what he wanted. When he heard that, Zi Yun's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. While he was lost in thought, Fairy Zi Xia flipped her hand, and an exquisite wooden box appeared in her palm. That's what they want, right? Zi Xia pursed her lips as she dragged the box. She'd been kept in the dark this entire time, so she didn't know much about the situation between the Zi family and the demons. So long as she thought about it carefully, she could guess what the box contained. When Zi Yun handed it to her, she'd opened it and confirmed that it didn't contain any of the family heirlooms of her ancestors, nor was it something she'd taken a liking to. They'd given it to her for safekeeping before the wedding, and hadn't given her any explanation. At the time, she didn't understand, but the instant the demons arrived, she heard the clan elders' roars, and her older brother's desperate pleas to City Lord Zi Yan. Now she understood. What the devil race wanted was this wooden box. They didn't want it to fall into the hands of the devil race. That's why they'd given it to Zi Xia, the daughter-in-law of the City Lord of Xian City, who they believed could keep it safe. Ziyan Yu. When she saw the box, Ziyun couldn't help but frown. Both Yi Zichen and the Great Sage looked at the box. The Great Sage was curious as to what was inside. Why had the demons gone to such lengths to steal it? In truth, Yi Zichen already had his suspicions. However, if this really did contain the fragment of the God Emperor's key, could this little box really sever the outside world's perception of it? Can I open it and take a look? Asked Yi Zichen. Of course. Zi Xia placed the box in Yi Zichen's hands without hesitation. Ziyun wanted to dissuade her, but in the end, he clenched his fists and swallowed his words. The wooden box was very light, as if it weighed nothing in his hand. Yi Zichen looked at the wooden box, took a few deep breaths, then used his divine power to form another arm. It emerged from his left sleeve and gently lifted the lid. At the same time, a ripple of energy appeared in Yi Zichen's arms. When he took out the item from his bosom, he saw a key fragment flickering with a dazzling light. It complemented the key fragment in the wooden box. It really did contain the key fragment to the God Emperor tomb. Back then, when the fragments of the God Emperor's tomb key were scattered all over the gods, fiendish demons, there would be some resonance between the fragments. The closer the distance, the stronger the resonance. Who would have thought that this small wooden box would be able to sever the connection between the fragments? He held the two fragments in his hands at the same time. Judging from the broken lines between the two, they couldn't be pieced together. Other than them, there were at least 3 other key fragments wandering around. Zi Xia and Zi Yun also looked at this scene in astonishment. They had both opened this wooden box before. There was only a very ordinary key fragment inside, and it had never shone like this before. When they looked at the key fragment Yi Zichen had taken out, it seemed to be the same key fragment as the one in the wooden box. Suddenly, Zi Yun's brows darkened. He had a bad premonition. He reached out and snatched the Zi family's key fragment. Yi Zichen was still trying to figure out just how many pieces the key fragment was in. When he saw this, he froze in fright. He glanced at Ziyun and saw that he'd already put the fragment away. The light in the room disappeared. It's just an ordinary key fragment. There's no need for you to investigate so deeply, is there? A dark look flashed across Ziyun's eyes as he held the wooden box. Yi Zichen rubbed his fingers, then smiled. All right, let's go. That's true. Big brother, Zixia couldn't understand Ziyun's actions. What are you doing? Silly little sister, can't you tell? Your supreme treasure and his friend are actually here for this key fragment as well. And to think I thought the supreme treasure was a good person. I never would have guessed he had a purpose for saving us. How unexpected, snorted Ziyun. The supreme treasure isn't that sort of person, explained Zixia. Shouldn't you ask him yourself? Ask him if he really wants this key fragment or not, roared Ziyun. Zixia wanted to argue, but Yi Zichen chuckled and reached out to stop her. He nodded and said, You're right. I can't deny that. I really do want this key fragment. Ziyun hadn't anticipated that he'd actually dared say it. An instant later, he sneered and narrowed his eyes. If you dare say it, I'll respect you for being a man and not playing dirty tricks. The great sage and Zixia were stunned. Even the great sage hadn't known Yi Zichen was here for this. But let me say something on behalf of the great sage. He had no idea he was here. I didn't ask him to save you. He really did want to save you. In truth, before I came here, I never knew your Z family had this key fragment, nor did I know it was on you. Everything was just a coincidence, said Yi Zichen. Ha, the point is, you want this key fragment, don't you? Said Ziyun. Of course. I already said I want it, said Yi Zichen solemnly. I want it, but I won't harm your family like the demons did. However, if I say it out loud, it won't be too friendly. I'll use your family to threaten you, just like they did. Ziyun was stunned. He didn't quite understand what he meant. The Z family's clansmen were in the demon's hands. What could he use to threaten them? Could it be the elder lying in the room? Or perhaps Zixia? Ziyun dragged Zixia behind him, and the aura of the celestial being realm inside him leaked out. Although he knew his cultivation was nothing in front of Yi Zichen and the great sage, he was the elder brother and their only fighting force. He had to step forward. You're quite cautious. Yi Zichen smiled and shook his head, then glanced at Fairy Zixia, who'd been dragged behind Ziyun in confusion. Even if it's for the sake of the great sage, I won't use Fairy Zixia as a hostage. Besides, I'll have too few bargaining chip. I'll use your entire family to threaten you. Chapter 1491. Ziyun froze. He never would have guessed that Yi Zichen would threaten him with this as a starting point. The Z family of Bibo City had fallen, and the demons had taken control of the entire clan. Given Ziyun's cultivation and abilities, trying to save his clansmen from the demons was a pipe dream. Even if the clan elders woke up and recovered from their injuries, it was impossible. The marriage alliance with the city lord was over. It seemed his only hope was Yi Zichen and the others. Despicable, said Ziyun through clenched teeth as he clenched the key fragment. If saying this makes you feel any better, then go ahead and say it. Yi Zichen's lips curved into a smile. I'm no saint. I don't have to pity the world's pitiful people. Indeed, perhaps my methods were a bit despicable. You don't know Gu Li's methods, but after clashing with him several times I do. If I save your clansmen, I'll most likely die tomorrow. I'm risking my own life. I'll use your entire clan's lives in exchange for a calamity you can't protect. Isn't that a good deal? Yi Zichen shrugged, his eyes flashing with a not quite decent smile. I have my reasons for wanting this God Emperor tomb fragment no matter what. It doesn't matter if you call me despicable or take advantage of others. If you give it to me, your clan won't die. If you don't blame me for being heartless. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Zixia bit her lip and stood between the two of them, unsure of what to do. Ziyun furrowed his brows and glanced at the great sage. Supreme treasure, don't you like my little sister? Are you really going to just stand by and watch the Z family die? For a long while, the great sage lowered his eyes and said nothing. Z Xia, did you see that? This is the supreme treasure you like? In order to get what he wants, he's even willing to use our clansmen as hostages. Did you see his cold, emotionless face? You've wasted thousands of years waiting for him, snorted Ziyun. I don't think they're doing anything wrong. In the face of Ziyun's sarcasm, Z Xia smiled indifferently and said, It's true that our Z family doesn't have the ability to protect this key fragment. An innocent man will get into trouble because of his wealth. We've known this since we were young. Since this fragment is a disaster for the Z family, why not? Why don't you give it away? Even you, what about me, tell me? Z Xia sneered at Ziyun and said, Elder brother, you've been making irresponsible remarks like a lunatic. You're the one who asked for the Joker, and you're also the one who criticized the Joker. You're the one who didn't let me be with Joker, and you're the one who did. You treat me like a baby. Become what? What would the supreme treasure be? Are the two of us your tools to protect our race? What do you know? Ziyun rebuked angrily. I don't know anything, and I'm too lazy to understand. But now, the problem is right in front of you. You can either give the fragment to Joker's friends, and they can go and save our clansmen. Otherwise, you can keep your fragment, and we'll burn incense for our clansmen next year. It's that simple, Zixia said. Suddenly, Ziyun's face stiffened. He rubbed his fingers and fell into deep thought. Although Yi Zichen's expression was cold, he was actually a bit nervous. He was worried that Ziyun would reject him resolutely and not give him the key fragment. The great sage's silence just now meant he was on his side, but Yi Zichen believed. Given his relationship with Z Xia, he absolutely couldn't just leave the Z family to their fate. Yi Zichen couldn't possibly be so cold as to ignore them. Even if it was out of respect for Zixia and the great sage, he had to help. He had his reasons for wanting the fragment of the God Emperor's tomb. He had to hold on to it no matter what. In order to hide his nervousness, Yi Zichen crossed his legs and stared ahead coldly. He instinctively pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. Time ticked by. The room was so quiet they could hear each other's breathing clearly, but in Yi Zichen's heart, it felt like a pendulum clock was ticking. As time passed, his emotions grew more and more agitated. He extinguished a few of his cigarette. How can you guarantee the survival of the Z family? After a long silence, Ziyun looked up at Yi Zichen. I can't guarantee anything. Yi Zichen stamped out his cigarette, then rose to his feet. I'm not sure about Gu Li's arrangements, and I've never had the upper hand against him. Forgive me, but I can't answer your question. Then you. When I said I'd guarantee the survival of your clansmen, I meant not all of them. I'll do everything in my power to keep your parents, elders, and brothers alive. But I can't guarantee the survival of your clan's guests, maids, and guards. I can even save them. Yi Zichen looked Ziyun straight in the eye. That might sound unfair to them, but the world isn't fair to begin with. On the battlefield, only generals, nobles, and nobles are protected. I've never heard of anyone protecting a soldier. That's the advantage their status gives them, said Ziyun. The same is true for the Z family, so I can only do my best to save the most important people. As for those I can't save, all I can do is mourn for them. But you can't blame me for that. At the end of the day, their calamity was brought upon them by your Z family, not me. I'm just trading with you. Then why don't I just hand it over to the demons? Asked Ziyun. You could give it to him, and the demons might really just take it and leave. Gu Li might still keep his word. Since that's the case. But like I said, I'm determined to get this key fragment. Yi Zichen changed the topic. If you give it to him, I'll take it. If I end up harming any of your Z family members, don't blame me. Or rather, Gu Li, who's always been at odds with me, will protect you and find a place for you to live. Gods? Or demons? That's your choice. Ziyun fell silent once more. After a while, he looked up and nodded. All right, I agree. But you have to wait until the Z family is safe before I give it to you. That's for the best. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Back in Greenwave City, the Z family Gu Li's expression hadn't been particularly good since returning to Greenwave City from Xian City. Yi Zichen. He sat in his room, his brows furrowed in fury. He narrowed his eyes as he looked into the mirror at his hideous face. His two companions were also in the room. Give the order. He gnashed his teeth and relayed his plan. After they left, Gu Li rose from his chair and looked out the window at the hazy moonlight. You're always going against me. You even want to steal and loo from me. Chapter 1492. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was the next morning. Ziyan's wedding was a complete mess, turning the city lord's manor into the laughingstock of the Yao race. Even so, the city lord's manor's Hui family still treated the Z family with great hospitality. All of this was because of the great sage and great Yao king. Never mind Hui Lu, even if the clan's ancestors left seclusion, they'd have to bow down to him. Since Gu Li's appointed time was almost up, Yi Zichen and the others didn't linger at Ziyan's manor. Presumably, Hui Lu had been waiting for them to leave. When they said they were about to leave, he pretended to flatter them, but he didn't actually try to make them stay. In front of the eastern city gate, the great sage and fairy Zixiao were dressed in matching outfits of purple and white. From start to finish, fairy Zixiao's gaze was fixed on the great sage. She rested her chin on her hands and her eyes shone brightly, as if she were a fangirl. Ziyun was clad in his armor, as usual. They stood in the sky 5 kilometers outside the city. Yi Zichen was there too, dressed in brand new black robes. However, he stood elsewhere. From time to time, his phone beeped with a notification. After 100 breaths of time, he put his phone away and approached the others. How did it go? The great sage narrowed his eyes. He knew Yi Zichen was contacting the gods just now. We can't count on them to come. We don't have enough time, said Yi Zichen. This was inevitable. They'd traveled from Heavenly God City to the Yao realm. Thanks to the transportation formations, they'd arrived quickly. However, there were no transportation formations in the Yao realm's northern empire. Going from the south to the north took them an entire day. Furthermore, they'd agreed to meet Gu Li in Bayubo City. Even if they'd contacted the gods last night, they still wouldn't have enough time. They can only meet us in the Yao realm's southern empire. Once we rescue the Z family, we can rush there as fast as we can. However, we'll have to deal with them on our own while we're in the north. That was the conclusion Yi Zichen had reached after contacting Xiao Yumei and the others. They'd only just arrived in the southern empire. Even if they rushed there as fast as they could, at best, they'd only reach the border between the north and south. And this was only the best-case scenario. The southern nation was not as hospitable as the northern nation. They favored the god race. Among the 4 nations of the monster race, the southern nation had always been a warmonger and had a particularly tense relationship with the god race. They had to be especially careful in the southern kingdom, and they couldn't send too many people here. If too many ruler-rank experts entered the southern kingdom, it would be easy for the southern kingdom to see it as a sign of war. They might even use this as an excuse to attack the god race's territory. That's enough. The great sage nodded. He'd long since prepared for the worst-case scenario. Now that Yi Zichen told him that the gods were waiting at the border between the north and south, this was already good news for him. Right now, the most difficult thing was actually to rescue them. As long as they could rescue them, escaping would not be as difficult as they had imagined. Let's set off immediately. We need to arrive before noon. There's still some distance between Cerulean Wave City and Xian City, said the great sage. Gu Li must have set up an inescapable net there, waiting for us to go over. Yi Zichen frowned deeply, then glanced at Fairy Zixia and Ziyun. Last night, I already explained the details of the plan. When the time comes, all you need to do is act according to the plan. As for the Z family's safety, leave it to me and the great sage to handle. All right. Fairy Zixia smiled and nodded. She didn't look worried in the slightest. Ever since the great sage appeared by her side, she'd been all smiles. In contrast to Fairy Zixia's liveliness, Ziyun was clearly much more reserved. In response to Yi Zichen's repeated warnings, he simply nodded solemnly and clenched his fists. You also have to prepare for the worst. Yi Zichen looked at Ziyun. Ziyun nodded. He knew very well what Yi Zichen meant. Guli might have already wiped out the entire Z family. Given the demon's past behavior, it wasn't impossible for them to do something like that. Don't forget our agreement. You don't need to worry about that, said Ziyun. Since I promised to give it to you later, I naturally won't regret it. Besides, I don't have the right to regret it, do I? Said Ziyun. That would be for the best. Yi Zichen nodded. Let's head out. Greenwave City. In order to obtain the key fragment to the God Emperor's tomb, Guli didn't just control the Z family. He also took over control of the entire city. The city lord's manor was still in operation, but in truth, Guli was the one giving the orders behind the scenes. What time is it? Guli sat in a rattan chair in the city lord's manor. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and faced the sun. It's almost noon, said the man on his left. Did the people at the city lord's manor cause any trouble? No, said the man on his right. The person on the right said, the city lord is now in our hands, and the people under him are also spineless. The city lord's mansion is now a puppet of our subordinates, and the city's defenses have all been replaced by our people. Moreover, they are all from the new demon race, and their auras are similar to that of the demon race. There's no difference. Please, release my wife and daughter. Only now did he notice that a white-haired old man knelt beneath an ancient tree in front of the chair. He was none other than the current city lord of Greenwave City. It seems you care a lot about your wife, said Guli with an indifferent smile. But that's right. At your age, you've married such a beautiful wife. It's normal for you to care a little. Don't worry too much. So long as he's obedient, your wife and daughter will naturally return to his side, safe and sound. Whatever you want, I'll listen to you. Can you? No. Guli's gaze froze. If you don't want your lovely wife and daughter to die, you'd better shut up. With that, the city lord didn't dare utter another word. Guli's eyes remained closed as he basked in the warmth of the sun. He sat facing the sunlight so that he could judge the time better. In truth, he was already somewhat impatient. Ever since he'd returned to Greenwave City last night, he'd been looking forward to this moment. In order to welcome Yi Zichen, he'd laid out an inescapable net. Don't ever disappoint me. You have to come. As he muttered to himself, a sinister smile tugged at Guli's lips. A cool breeze blew past. Rustling sounds could be heard from the forest on both sides of the house. Time was slowly creeping closer to noon. We're here. Suddenly, Guli opened his eyes and cracked his neck. Let's go see if they're here or not. Chapter 1493. Please. We're clearly from the same family, yet someone invited us into the clan. What a novel experience. Following behind Guli's entourage, Ziyun snorted with a fierce glint in his eyes. When he heard this, the guide didn't respond at all. He simply led the way meticulously. From time to time, he stopped to wait for Ziyun and Ziyun, as if afraid they'd get lost in their own home. That's pretty good. It's a new experience after all. Zixia was still as happy-go-lucky as ever. She really did think this was her first time here. She couldn't help but look around. She couldn't be more familiar with this place. She knew exactly where to sneak out without her clansmen noticing. The cobblestone path twisted and turned. As they passed through Jadeite Forest, Ziyun and Zixia didn't see a single member of the Z family. They didn't even see the most ordinary of maids or guards. The only thing they could sense was the demonic aura enveloping the entire residence. Holy Master, we've brought them. Gu Li's back was to Ziyun and Zixia. When he heard that they'd brought them, a dazzling smile surfaced on his sinister face. He instantly turned around and spread his arms. Yi Zichen, you. His voice came to an abrupt halt. When Gu Li turned around and saw who'd arrived, he froze, his smile gradually fading. Only Zixia and Ziyun had arrived. As for the great sage and Yi Zichen, they hadn't come with them. Gu Li looked them over carefully, then sat down in a chair he'd prepared beforehand. Of course it's us. Who else did you think it was? Ziyun's gaze was cold. Did you think it was Yi Zichen and that wild monkey? I actually hoped he'd come, but he was worried you'd set up an ambush here. He said he'd wait for his subordinates to arrive first. Zixia and I don't have time to wait, nor can we. Is that so? Gu Li smiled disdainfully, then hooked his finger at the person next to him. That person immediately leaned in, and the two of them conversed in low voices. Gradually, Gu Li's eyes filled with disappointment. What a pity. This sigh wasn't directed at Zixia or Ziyun, but rather at himself. According to that person, the great sage and Yi Zichen really hadn't come together. Hundreds of kilometers away from Blue Wave City, Zixia and Ziyun entered their monitoring range, but apart from the two of them, they did not detect the presence of anyone else. He was very disappointed. They'd clearly laid an inescapable net for Yi Zichen to fall into, but this time, he'd chosen to retreat. As far as Gu Li knew, Yi Zichen wasn't such a coward. It seemed that his temperament had changed after so many years. In other words, after he opened his star eye, the Protoss Almighty who were on his side could not allow him to act as he did before. What a disappointment! Gu Li couldn't help but sigh as he leaned back in his chair, but he quickly composed himself. Although he was sad that Yi Zichen hadn't come, he still had to properly welcome Zixia and Ziyun. Naturally, they came here for their clansmen. Did you bring what I asked for? Of course. Ziyun reached into his pocket and took out the wooden box. When he opened it slightly, Gu Li's eyes lit up. There was no mistaking it. This box contained the fragment of the God Emperor's tomb he wanted. However, before long, Ziyun closed the box and Gu Li looked away. I really have to thank Yi Zichen for his fake righteousness. I can't believe he didn't just take it from you. Since you've brought what I want, give it to me. Gu Li extended his hand. But at this moment, Ziyun took the wooden box back. Gu Li couldn't help but knit his brows and tap the table. What do you mean? I want to make sure my clansmen are safe, said Ziyun solemnly. Are you trying to negotiate with me? A sinister glint flashed through Gu Li's eyes, then he snorted. I admire your courage, but don't you think your actions are a bit rash? Instantly, Ziyun felt the surrounding temperature plummet, and he felt as if a venomous snake were staring at him. Cold energy seeped into his body from the ground, but Ziyun's expression was resolute. He glared back at Gu Li, refusing to budge an inch. Of course I know. Given my and Ziyun's cultivation, we have no right to negotiate with you. I'm also well aware that you're strong enough to take it from me effortlessly. Since I've thought of all this and still dared to come, I naturally have my reasons. His oppressive might bore down on Ziyun. Even though the pressure was intense, Ziyun's face paled. His legs trembled violently and he broke out in a cold sweat. However, he gnashed his teeth and clutched the wooden box tightly. He glared viciously at Gu Li. Fine, I agree to your demands. If even Yi Zichen can refrain from forcefully taking it from you, I naturally won't stoop so low. He waved his hand gently, and the oppressive might vanished without a trace. Ziyun took a few deep breaths. Just now, that oppressive might had nearly suffocated him. If he was already in such a state, then Ziyun. He glanced at Fairy Zixia. Her face was flushed with a sickly red, and her chest heaved violently. I said before that all I want is the key fragment to the God Emperor's tomb. So long as you give it to me, I naturally won't harm your clansmen. Of course, if you're still worried, there's no harm in taking you in for a look. Guli cracked his neck, then rose to his feet. Ziyun and Zixia followed closely behind him. After passing through a winding path, they arrived at the back mountain of the Z family estate. Before they even entered the courtyard, Ziyun sensed the auras of dozens of diviner-level demon experts. They were all experts assigned to watch over the Z family clansmen. Let's go in and take a look. Not a single one of them is missing. They might all be injured, but at least they're still alive. Guli chuckled and pointed inside. Ziyun and Zixia walked in side by side. The courtyard was filled with heavily injured Z family clansmen. Quite a few of them were on the verge of death, hanging on by a thread. Crack! Ziyun clenched his fist. Guli smiled calmly. I didn't lie to you, did I? I didn't lie to you, did I? They're all still alive, even though they've suffered some injuries. After you give me the key fragment of the tomb of the God Emperor, I can heal their injuries, and I can even give your Z family resources that will allow you to become a first-rate force. No need, said Ziyun. A low voice suddenly rang out from Ziyun's direction. However, it was not Ziyun who had spoken. Chapter 1494. Before coming here, Yi Zichen had foreseen that Guli would set up an inescapable net to deal with him. It would be very difficult for him and the great sage to defend against Guli's subordinates. Even if the two of them managed to break through the encirclement, the Z family members would still be affected. That was why Yi Zichen had come up with this plan. He'd used the 72 transformations to create the box containing the key fragment. Then, he told Ziyun and Zixia to go ahead and repeat the lines they'd rehearsed countless times before heading out. He had Guli lead them to the Z family clansmen. Earlier, Yi Zichen hadn't dared say he'd save the entire Z family clansmen because he could only use this method once. He couldn't be sure whether or not Guli would lock them up separately. To his surprise, Guli had placed them all in the same courtyard for the sake of keeping an eye on them. I knew you'd come. When he saw Yi Zichen appear out of nowhere, Guli's eyes didn't betray even a hint of surprise. On the contrary, he smiled faintly. Of course I came. Thank you for leading the way. Otherwise, it would have taken me a lot of trouble to find this place. Also, thank you for keeping them all in the same place. It saved me the trouble of looking for someone else, laughed Yi Zichen. I truly miscalculated. It's just that there are so many people in the Z family. You. Before Guli could even finish his sentence, a black pagoda suddenly appeared in the sky with a loud rumble. Did you forget? The Yao Ceiling Pagoda is in my hands. Return. Under the astonished gazes of the surrounding demons, the members of the Z clan in the courtyard flickered, and in the blink of an eye, all the members of the Z clan in the courtyard disappeared. Ziyun and Zixia disappeared as well. Yi Zichen put them all in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, then the black pagoda returned to his hands. It really is a treasure. Even now, Guli didn't seem surprised in the slightest. I still have to thank you for coming to my trap, and even delivering all your treasures into my hand. Suddenly, Guli took a step back. Yi Zichen was instantly surrounded by a sea of demon experts. Hey, quite a few people, huh? Yi Zichen scratched his head and laughed. Are you afraid? Asked Guli. Afraid? Did we just meet? What have I not seen before? You actually think that I'm afraid? It seems like you still haven't noticed. Do you want me to remind you? Don't you feel like I'm missing someone? Guli, who'd been grinning from ear to ear, finally revealed a hint of surprise. Only now did he realize that the great sage, who'd always been by Yi Zichen's side, wasn't here. He knew that person's cultivation realm. At the very least, he was an imperial lord. Could it be? Great sage, I'm here. Suddenly, Yi Zichen waved behind Guli. Almost all the demons in the courtyard were attracted by it and looked back. However, there was no one behind them at all. Where was the great sage Yi Zichen had mentioned? When they retracted their gazes, they discovered he was gone. F*CK, I've fallen into his trap. Yi Zichen had long since lost all sense of direction. Guli, who hadn't swore in ages, couldn't help but curse. Did anyone see where he went? None of the demons replied. Guli narrowed his eyes and looked around. He could vaguely sense the spatial fluctuations around him. Could it be that he'd mastered the Tao of space as well? Chase him. Even if he's comprehended the Tao of space, there's no way he can travel such a long distance in such a short amount of time. He can't leave Bayubo City. The surrounding demons chased after him. Guli, who'd remained in the courtyard, couldn't help but mutter to himself. What was wrong with him recently? It was clearly an easy trick to see through, yet he jumped in without the slightest suspicion. Enlu. After learning that Yi Zichen had taken Enlu, he realized that he couldn't remain as calm and composed as before. He desperately wanted to kill the person who'd taken Enlu, but little did he know, his plans were riddled with loopholes. Guli shook his hands, narrowed his eyes, and chased after him. Not long after Guli left, a pebble beneath his feet suddenly leaped up into the sky, then returned to Yi Zichen's appearance. The Tao of space? Even scratching the surface of such a grand Tao required a tremendous amount of time and experience. Even if he was a peerless, monstrous genius, he'd only been in the God realm for a short time. He didn't have the time to study such things. It was still the 72 transformations. While Guli and the other demon experts panicked, he took advantage of that moment to transform into a pebble. Damn it, that scared me to death. Yi Zichen leaned against the wall and took a few deep breaths. From time to time, he stuck his head out to see what was going on. He absolutely didn't dare use his divine sense. If he did, the Z family's demon experts would definitely sense it. There were so many devil experts in the Z family, so they would definitely sense it. At that time, they would follow the fluctuations and come over. Even if he had wings, he wouldn't be able to escape. There's no time to waste. Yi Zichen calmed himself down slightly, then turned into a moth, which flapped its wings as it leisurely left the Z family estate. Hey, just how many people did Guli bring with him? Yi Zichen flew for a while, then landed somewhere to survey his surroundings. He was less than 1,000 miles away, but he sensed at least 10 diviner-level demons searching for him. Whenever someone swept past him with their divine sense, Yi Zichen would have to completely erase his aura and disguise it as a moth's. It didn't seem like he'd be noticed in the short term, but switching between auras consumed too much divine power. In his moth form, he couldn't replenish himself. Besides, even if Blue Wave City was a small city, he didn't know how long it would take for a moth to slowly fly there. Just as he was pondering how to leave Green Wave City as soon as possible. It's him. Inwardly, Yi Zichen smiled, then flapped his wings and flew forward. In order to find Yi Zichen, Guli's subordinates had wreaked havoc in Green Wave City. Countless peddlers couldn't even find peace. Whoosh. At this time, a demon race expert landed in front of the vendor's stall that was selling spirit herbs and spirit medicines. Have you seen this person before? The demon expert stretched out his hand, and a screen of water appeared in the sky. Yi Zichen's image slowly appeared on the screen. The vendor was a fatty, but he was merely an Earth Supreme. The demon expert before him was a diviner. Logically speaking, the vendor should have been terrified of a demon expert, but he actually laughed foolishly. What are you laughing at? I'm asking you if you've seen him or not. Chapter 1495. The fat vendor pointed behind the demon expert and laughed foolishly. The expert didn't suspect anything and really looked behind him. However, there was no one behind him. Before he could react, he felt a blow to the head. I said it's behind, so it's behind. Why are you so stupid? The demon expert, still dizzy from the beating, turned around and saw that the fat vendor had already transformed into Yi Zichen. He didn't even have time to release his divine awareness to notify the other demons. Another blow smacked him in the head. The demon expert could only point at Yi Zichen's blurry face, tilt his head and fall to the ground. I knew you weren't smart. You're so easy to fool. He dragged the devil race expert to the side of the street and stripped him clean in a few moves. Not long after, from the entrance of the alley, a person who looked exactly like the previous devil race expert walked over. That's much easier now. This person was naturally Yi Zichen's incarnation. Leaving the city at the speed of a moth was too slow. If he'd transformed into a commoner, given Gu Li's level of caution, he wouldn't have let him leave the city. Instead, he would have investigated him thoroughly. Only if he transformed into his subordinate would he be able to use his diviner cultivation without arousing suspicion. Glancing at the demon race expert who had been stripped naked in the alleyway, he lightly crooked his finger and sent him into the Yao-subduing pagoda. There was no way he could destroy the corpse. It was best to be cautious and avoid using divine power if possible. He'd toss him into the Yao-ceiling pagoda first. As for the rest, that could wait until they left the city. What a foolish old man! Yi Zichen couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He'd thought it would take some effort to deal with him. He hadn't expected it to go so smoothly. Li Ju! Li Ju! Suddenly, several shouts echoed through the sky. At first, Yi Zichen didn't have time to react. It wasn't until someone landed beside him that he realized Li Ju was the demon's name. So it's someone from the Jili. Yi Zichen muttered to himself, then averted his gaze. Transforming into Li Ju was just the beginning. This was the most important thing. He needed to use these demons to test whether or not the demon experts would see through his disguise at close range. They were getting closer and closer. Although Yi Zichen did his best to hide his emotions, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Li Ju, what are you waiting for? Did you find him? The two demon experts descended. These two demon experts were also in the celestial being realm, similar to Li Ju himself. I didn't find it. Come down and rest, said Yi Zichen. Then why aren't you looking? Do you still have time to rest? The taller demon expert said. It's fine to rest for a while. We've been searching for 4 hours. If the person the sacred master found was really proficient in spatial Dao techniques, he would have escaped long ago. Even if he doesn't run, he's at least at the ruler level if he can use space Dao arts. Wouldn't we be courting death if we ran into him? A devil expert said. Shut up. The taller demon race expert glared at him. If Saint Master hears this, you're dead. Let's talk among ourselves, the shorter demon expert said. It's better to be careful. You and I shouldn't waste too much time here. Even if it's just for show, we still have to get busy. Li Ju, don't rest. If the sacred master sees you, you'll be in for a treat. As soon as he finished speaking, the expert from the demon clan flew away. The shorter demon clan expert patted Li Ju's shoulder and flew off in another direction. As he watched the two demons leave, Yi Zichen couldn't help but wipe his lips and smile. The 72 transformations really was a divine technique. The two demon experts stood in front of him, yet they couldn't tell that he wasn't Li Ju, but rather Yi Zichen. But when he thought about it, it made sense. When he'd transformed into a pebble, Gu Li and so many other demons had been present, but hadn't anyone noticed him. On the way here, Yi Zichen had been rather worried. Would they really let him go so easily? Yi Zichen scratched his head, then didn't tarry any longer. He hurried to the gates of Greenwave City. On the way, the demons he encountered didn't pay him much attention. Instead, they used their divine senses to carefully search the city. An hour later, as Yi Zichen hurried at top speed, he could vaguely make out Greenwave City's walls. At the rate things were going, he'd be able to break free in less than 100 breaths of time. Is it really that simple? Yi Zichen didn't dare imagine it. Li Ju. At that moment, someone called out Yi Zichen's name from behind him. On the way, Yi Zichen heard his name repeatedly, but no one had noticed his disguise. This time, he didn't take it seriously at all. He turned around and looked back. Unexpectedly, the person rushing towards him was Gu Li, Holy Master. Yi Zichen didn't dare be negligent around an old rival like Guli. Yi Zichen bowed respectfully, then looked down and quietly waited for Guli to arrive. Is there any news of Yi Zichen? Not yet, said Yi Zichen. If there's no news, then why are you in such a hurry to leave the city? I thought you'd heard that Yi Zichen had left, said Guli. He'd actually suspected that. Yi Zichen's heart jolted. He'd been in such a hurry to leave the city that he'd forgotten about this. I just thought that if we couldn't find him after so long, he might have already left the city. That's why I wanted to search outside, said Yi Zichen. That's not a bad idea. It's been so long, he might really have left the city. Yi Zichen hurriedly nodded. All right, then go out and take a look. Guli waved his hand with a smile. Yi Zichen nodded as if he'd just received an imperial edict. However, before he could take more than a few steps, wait, who was the person you told me about last night? I forgot. Can you remind me again? Yi Zichen, who just turned around to leave, instantly stopped. He narrowed his eyes and looked in Guli's direction, only to see that Guli was smiling back at him. I really nearly let you get away. You've mastered the 72 transformations quite well. Yi Zichen? I can't believe you noticed. Yi Zichen chuckled, then returned to his original appearance. His eyes were filled with regret. I thought you'd learned the Tao of space, but I forgot you had the 72 transformations. Yi Zichen, you're really something. You tried to play me in the dark? You've got guts, said Guli. I almost got away, sneered Yi Zichen. Got away? That's impossible. In truth, I've long since set up an inescapable net outside the city. Once you're outside, you'll be more likely to be exposed, said Guli. Is that so? Said Yi Zichen. Of course. Guli nodded. Are you sure about how the great sage managed to get into the city? The great sage? Trying that trick again? That's no good, is it? Laughed Guli disdainfully. It's true. If you don't believe me, turn around and take a look. That stick is about to hit you. If you don't get out of my way, I'm afraid it'll smash your skull in. Guli's expression changed. He reached out with his divine sense, then instantly froze. Chapter 1496. In the void, the shadow of the cudgel cut through the void, accompanied by a deafening sound of rushing wind. As the staff swept past, it was as if a primordial demonic beast had torn a hole in the sky. A pair of scarlet eyes peered out of the crack. Anyone who saw them couldn't help but feel their hair stand on end. As the demonic beast stared at him, Guli couldn't help but feel a chill run through his heart. Then he narrowed his eyes and took in a deep breath. Petty tricks. Guli didn't dare hold anything back against the great sage's staff. He knew that the monkey in front of him was an Imperial Lord-level expert. Moreover, this staff strike was extremely strange. A ray of starlight descended from the sky. His hands glowed with starlight. Judging from his expression, he was preparing to receive the staff with his bare hands. Holy Master, wake up! Just as Guli was concentrating, a furious roar reverberated through the sky. Instantly, Guli's vision cleared up. The great sage who'd unleashed the staff had already vanished from the sky. The scarlet demonic beast's eyes were gone as well, and he couldn't sense any energy fluctuations in the air. You're a little distracted, big bro. The brick smashed into the back of Guli's head. Don't ever underestimate this brick. He'd obtained it after opening the 3rd floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It was a substandard divine artifact cold weapon with a stun effect. As for the great sage who'd appeared in the sky just now, that was the effect of the 2nd divine artifact, the illusionary spirit pearl. It could see through people's hearts and create the scene their opponents feared the most. Yi Zichen was certain Guli was afraid of the great sage, which was why he'd chosen to use these 2 divine artifacts to escape. Guli was so focused on his attack that he didn't notice Yi Zichen at all. The brick smacked him squarely in the back of his head. Suddenly, his vision blurred. Did you know that? This is the power of a RMB player. Yi Zichen smirked and watched as the demons converged on him. Yi Zichen took out a modified smoke grenade he'd prepared earlier and threw it viciously at the ground. The surrounding area was shrouded in mist. Even divine awareness couldn't penetrate within 100 meters. If it weren't for the fact that I'm in a hurry right now, I'd really want to stab you to death with my sword. Yi Zichen rolled his eyes. When he sensed that the demon experts were already within range of the clouds, he didn't dare tarry in the slightest. He pushed off the ground and charged out of the clouds. As for the demons outside the mist, eat this old sun's stick. After scaring Gu Li twice, the great sage finally showed his face for real. Wielding the Rui Jingu Bang, he was like a god descending to the mortal world. The demons were terrified out of their wit. When he saw Yi Zichen emerge from the clouds as promised, the great sage casually killed a diviner demon and waved at him. Yi Zi, over here. Of Gu Li's subordinates, only the two people by his side could make the great sage feel some fear. Just now, Yi Zichen had knocked Gu Li unconscious. The two of them were too eager to protect their master, so they'd long since entered the smoke bomb's range. To the great sage, the demons outside were nothing more than small fries. Get rid of him. It was effortless for them. This was a battle of wealth. Judging from the results, Yi Zichen had the absolute upper hand. I'm coming! Shouted Yi Zichen as he rushed to the great sage's side. By now, there were practically no demons capable of fighting him in the sky above Bayubo City. You're not hurt, are you? The great sage was clad in the Monkey King's battle armor and hefted the Rui Jingu Bang. He looked very much like the great sage, Heaven's equal. Speaking of which, it was strange. The Heavenly Palace had clearly bestowed him with this armor, but in terms of defensive power, it was far superior to most divine artifacts of the god race. There was also his Rui Jingu Bang, the divine sea-stabilizing pillar of the Eastern Sea. It was far, far stronger than most divine artifacts. It wasn't just the great sage. Even Yang Jian's Erling Lance was the same. Hey, I'm fine. Yi Zichen glanced at the demon expert diving into the mist, then took out the brick. My special effects divine artifacts are more than enough to give him a run for his money. Let's save the Z family clansmen. Of course. They're all in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Then let's hurry up and leave. Have you cleared out the demons outside the city? Asked Yi Zichen, recalling Gu Li's earlier words. The great sage furrowed his brows, then glanced outside the city. Are there demons outside as well? I looked around a few times, but I didn't sense any demonic aura. No demonic aura? Given the great sage's cultivation, not even a demon god of the same level as him could hide his aura from him. Furthermore, the great sage had the old lord's fiery eyes of truth. He could see through all demons. The great sage hadn't come immediately because Yi Zichen was worried Gu Li would set up an ambush outside the city. That was why he'd left the great sage outside to deal with the demons. Then forget it. Let's retreat. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes, then chose to retreat. They couldn't stay here for long. The smoke bombs and bricks effects wouldn't last long. Once the smoke cleared and Gu Li woke up, Yi Zichen and the great sage would be at a disadvantage. However, Yi Zichen was still cautious. Gu Li wasn't the type of person to speak without thinking. Besides, Yi Zichen had seen demons who could disguise themselves as other races. However, at that very moment, before the two of them could move, they discovered that the surrounding space had been completely sealed off. A fierce wind howled through the air, dispersing all the smoke from the smoke bombs. Gu Li stood in the center of the smoke, his gaze clear as he smiled at the sky. There was no way the brick stun effect would disappear so quickly. Yi Zichen glanced to the side. Lying next to Gu Li was a man who looked exactly like him. This was most likely the one who'd actually eaten the brick. Do you think you're the only one with more divine artifacts? Don't forget, I'm the Lord of Heaven and Earth as well. As he spoke, the man beside Gu Li transformed into a puppet. Yi Zichen recognized this divine artifact. It was ranked 17th on the divine artifact rankings. A substitute puppet. By feeding it with blood essence, it could transform into the user for a short time. Through the connection between the two, the user could completely disguise themselves as the user and confuse the enemy. As for the net that trapped you, I'm sure you recognize it. It was ranked 9th on the Divine Artifact rankings. Inescapable net. This guy. Yi Zichen's gaze turned cold. He hadn't expected their fight to turn into a contest between divine artifacts. However, from the looks of it, it seemed he was slightly inferior to Guli. As expected, when fighting against someone as scheming as Guli, he couldn't afford to be careless. Actually, what I said earlier was true. At first, I really did fall for your tricks. Thank goodness, I was able to make the correct adjustments after that. What do you think? It looks like I'm the winner again. Are you sure? Yi Zichen laughed. Do you really think you've won?